Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and we are here for my Week 4 LPL overview, analysis, and of course, at the end, my updated power rankings. Week 4 was pretty crazy, but of course, it is the LPL. I don't want to waste too much time on any of this intro because we are going to be going over every single game that happened this week, all 7 days of games in the LPL, easily my longest video of the week, talking about where everything went right and wrong. Before we jump into the rest of the video, though, of course, let me know down in the comment section below what you guys thought of the LPL in Week 4. Who did you think overperformed? Who did you think underperformed? Who do you like right now? Who do you not like right now? Who are you against the grain and for the grain, etc. on? I want to hear you guys' opinions, your thoughts, everything. I'd love to hear that down in the comment section below. You guys know I love chatting it up with you guys down there. So, without further ado, I do just kind of want to jump into it. Of course, we've got 7 full days of LPL to cover here today. So, let's jump right into day number 1. And we kick day number 1 off with the matchup between FunPlus Phoenix and Weibo Gaming. And Weibo picks up another win here. They've had a little bit of a tumultuous start to the year. They've really only played top teams so far, being able to dispatch quite a few of them. I mean, Top Esports really the one that they were able to actually beat. But this team really has proven themselves to be right up on that same echelon as basically any other top team in the region that absolutely continued here. Obviously going up against an FPX team that's just kind of okay. They're certainly not the worst team in the league. There are teams that I definitely think are worse than them, but they're certainly not a team that I would be expecting to push for playoffs, and that's basically how they were treated in this series. Weibo was significantly better, and they played like it. My player of the series is going to go to Karsa. I know Karsa still gets a really bad rap, but he had a hell of a week, and we'll talk about that later, but another really good series from him. It really feels like when Weibo wins games, it is off the back of Karsa playing really well. When they don't win games, Karsa is often not playing well. It feels like the fate of this team and the forward-backward motion of everything that happens with Weibo is going to rest on the shoulders of this jungler. And that can be a good thing. Obviously, jungle is a strong enough position where if you're consistently good at it, you're going to be able to have an impact. However, you know, you want to see a little bit more agency, I would say, from some of these other players. From the Shy, from Xiao, from Light, from Crisp. These are all incredible players that can win games on their own, but it really does feel like either Karsa wins and gets advantages for his laners, or they play really passive, or the Shy's running it down, or something like that. It really is either Karsa winning or nobody winning. And luckily for Weibo in this series, Karsa absolutely won. He destroyed Hacker, who just did not have a good series. We'll talk about him in a bit, but shout out to Karsa. He just continues to kind of roll along. That Vi game in game number 1, incredibly good. He was able to generate a lead very early on into that game, into the Wukong. He was able to carry a lot of that gold into the mid to late game, and then basically it was unwinnable for FPX by the time they hit 15 minutes. Game number 2 was a little bit more back and forth, but even then, Karsa was still setting up significantly better than Hacker was. Not only did he have full jungle control, not only did he have full control of basically everything on the map, objectives, lanes, you know, everything had pressure on the side of Weibo, but he did it on Sejuani, which meant that by the time you got to the late game, Hacker on the Vi this time, you're not really going to have the same kind of pressure. You need a lot of gold on Vi in order for her to be able to match something like a Sejuani. You also add on to that something like a Syndra that's going to be able to team fight late game. K'Sante, Sejuani is really difficult to get through. You still have a Caitlyn for damage. There's just a lot of things on the side of Weibo that make it very difficult for FPX to actually win the game here once Weibo was able to generate their lead. So credit to Karsa, he just continues to look good. Hopefully he can keep it up. I know a lot of people are still low on him and what he's actually been able to do this split. I'm the opposite. I know he didn't have a perfect series against BLG, but still has had a very good year, and I think he's going to be the heart and soul of Weibo Gaming. I think the other player that I want to shout out on Weibo in this series is going to be Crisp in the support position. I talk pretty often about Nami players on this channel. There are just the difference between a really good Nami player and like a just good enough Nami player in a meta where Lucian Nami and even something like Caitlyn Nami is so strong is massive. It really is gigantic. You need to be a good Nami player to be a top tier support right now, or a very good one, and that's what Crisp is. Crisp is a very good Nami player. I'm talking about someone who knows exactly where to stand in team fights so that when they do throw out the ultimate, it gains maximum value. Someone who knows where to throw their bubble so that they actually hit at least one person every time they throw it out, because honestly, we just see a lot of bubble misses, especially in terms of laning from a lot of Namis around the world, but you know, good Namis will know exactly where they need to predict the enemy to be at any given moment to set up plays for the rest of the bot lane, and I think Crisp definitely has proven that he is a top-tier Nami. Another really good series from him. Light really did capitalize a lot on it. I know his scoreline looks unbelievable, but most of that was just kind of capitalizing on some really good plays that Crisp was able to make. Not that Light played bad by any means. His positioning was really good, and he did capitalize on a lot of the mistakes that, FPX's bot lane, in particular LWX, was making in terms of positioning, but credit to Crisp for being the one to kind of catch them out, and credit to Light for being the one to follow them up. So, jungle, bot lane, really the two standouts here. The Shy had some really good plays on Cassante, but overall just kind of a not bad performance, just not something that really stood out. And then Xiaohu was again fine, two control mages, or I guess two control mage and a burst mage. Not a particularly dominant performance. This was really about Karsa being able to set up a lot in the jungle and then translating a lot of that lead either to Light or the Shy, and then Crisp really helping Light a lot. On the side of FPX, a little bit of a frustrating loss. You would have hoped to have at least been able to keep up with Weibo. I don't particularly worry about this FPX team. This is kind of what I would have expected from them going into a team like Weibo Gaming. Credit to LWX, like I said, he was out of position quite a bit, especially in that second game, but I do think he did a lot of damage. He was really the only offensive threat that FPX had at any point in this series, on the Zeri, on the Lucian. He was trying his best. He clearly is the best player on this team. I think Care is right up there with him. He just didn't have a particularly good series into a player like Xiaohu, which is not super surprising, but LWX still doing relatively well, even with the rest of the team around him kind of crumbling. Again, like I said before, a couple of weeks ago, or last week, or pretty much every time I've talked about LWX, he has the talent to be one of the best ADCs in the league. Unfortunately, it just really hasn't come out in recent weeks. I thought Lele was meh on 2 games of Yumi. It's fine. It's really hard to judge Yumi, to be honest. And then dud of the series was really easy here. It's going to go to Hacker in the jungle. Like I said here for Weibo, the jungle matchup was just super in favor of Weibo this entire series. It was super in favor of Karsa this entire series, and unfortunately, that was at the expense of Hacker. I know a lot of people are dogging on Hacker in the post-match Reddit thread. He was actually really good in their win over Ultra Prime, his former organization, going up against a player like Ning. He was significantly better than him in their first series, so I'm not exactly going to sit here and say, oh my god, Hacker can't win. Hacker is actively dragging this team down. He did actively drag this team down in this series, but they're sitting at 1-3, and that one win is because of Hacker, and so I'm going to give him a little bit more time in order to kind of, inch his way into being a little bit more comfortable playing with this team. But as of right now, I'm not super excited about the outlook of FPX with Hacker in. I just don't think there's a lot of upside. I've liked Hacker in the past on this channel, but ever since basically 2 years ago, that has been non-existent anymore. He's just kind of downgraded into being one of the most inconsistent junglers in the LPL, and that certainly is saying something. So that's kind of represented here. Hacker had a good series last week. He's going to have a bad one here against a good team. So he's going to get done to the series. Xiao Lao, who was nothing in the top lane on Gwen. Care did nothing on the Rise in particular. LWX tried his best, but again, some mispositioning errors and some targeted focusing, I would say, overall, from Weibo allowed them to just kind of dominate him in and out of lane. Overall, not a great series for FPX. I guess it could have been worse, but really, you're just kind of playing to your expectations, which is, quite frankly, to get destroyed by a good team like Weibo Gaming, who are proving to be one of the best teams in the league. I think before last week, I had them at number 2 in my power rankings. They end up falling after losing to BLG. They're just going to be one of those teams that is able to win some games and lose some games. They're going to be able to beat any team in the region. They're going to be able to lose to basically any team in the region. They're going to be very high variance, but when they work, they are the best team in the LPL, and I think that they have proven that early on in the season here. Moving on to our second game here of day number 1. We had a battle between the worst team in the league and the best team in the league, and it went just about as you would expect, as we saw Anyone's Legend taking on JD Gaming, and JDG just with the utter obliteration. I mean, game 1 was 19 minutes, game 2 was 24 minutes, but it was a perfect game. I believe it was perfect game. If not, then they took 1 tower, but golly, this was devastating on the side of JD Gaming. This was not particularly close. Everybody, and I mean everybody, looking really, really good on the side of JDG. It was kind of hard to just narrow it down to 1 or 2 players, but let's go ahead and talk about it. I think player of the series was actually kind of difficult here. I think some people are going to give it to Kanavi because he really did control the entire series here over Xiao Hao, who is easily Anyone's Legend's best player, and Kanavi really made him look like an absolute chump in this game. A lot of people want to give it to Knight. That was a fantastic Jace game in game number 1, and then he's got the balls to pull out Lee Sin mid in game number 2 and just still style on it into something like an Akali, which should theoretically be a pretty impossible matchup to win if you are Lee Sin, but he's just so much better that it never actually mattered. I think some people are going to want to give it to Missing because he was just in control of basically every play that was made over the course of this entire series. I, for one, am going to give it to Ruler in the bot lane because he was the one actively capitalizing on a lot of those plays, especially in game number 2 on the Zeri, which I think was the single best game that a player on JDG had this series. His positioning is just ludicrously good. It is actually unfair to have a player like Ruler next to a player like Knight, to have a player who can position the way that Ruler did in game number 2 with a player like Missing who's just everywhere on the map, being able to contribute, especially on that Lulu, and then having Knight play Lee Sin mid and absolutely style on him. Kanavi playing Maokai and dominating 369, playing Gragas and looking really solid in the top lane. I mean, what exactly is the weakness of this JDG team? Like, I really do need to know. Ruler has been phenomenal. He's been everything that we could have wanted and more since coming over to the LPL. I know a lot of people were really concerned about whether or not Ruler was just going to click in the same way that he did for Gen G for so many years. Obviously, finally leaving the organization that kind of made his career and that, made him one of, if not the greatest AD carry of all time. Well, a lot of those questions have just been answered at this point. He will be just fine. He is right in the MVP conversation in the LPL here as well. He has been terrific. He plays the Jhin in game number 1, does a really good job of setting up the Maokai early on in the game to be able to have him make a lot of plays. And then that Jace in the back half was just so ridiculously dominant for Knight. And then game number 2, he got to be the carry here on the Zeri. He's just done everything right. He can play the secondary carry. He can play the primary carry. He can play with resources in lane. He can play without resources in lane. Like, what exactly does Ruler not do that you would want him to do? He just continues to look like the best AD carry in the entire region, and I doubt that will change. Him and Missing have great synergy together in the 2v2, but Missing is also willing to be incredibly aggressive in leaving lane more so than he was last year with a player like Hope, because he trusts Ruler to be able to play weak side, to be able to play safe in that 2v1 potentially, if he wants to go and make plays elsewhere on the map. That's a luxury that JDG just did not have last year. No offense to Hope, he's a good player, but he's not that, right? And then Knight's been fantastic, Kanavi's been fantastic, 369's been good. Still think he's probably been quote-unquote the weak link, but that's a pretty damn good weak link, right? Overall, JDG looks genuinely unstoppable, and they're just fun to watch. As for AL, brutal loss here. You got absolutely obliterated, you got basically perfect gamed. I think they only gave up 2 kills and a turret the entire series. So, yikes, that's not particularly good. Dud of the series could basically go to anyone here, but I don't know how you don't give it to Sword Art after that Game 1 performance on the Caitlyn. I mean, that was abysmally bad. I understand that Caitlyn into Heimer and a Jhin, can be relatively strong, but you gotta be good at these champions in order to play them at this level, and Sword Art clearly was not good at these champions. He was literally netting backwards in game number 1 and right into the enemy team, hitting nobody. It was incredibly impressive and also efficiently bad. I don't really know what to say. Sword Art has fallen off of a cliff. This is not the same player that was even on TSM in 2020. Certainly not the same player that was playing before 2020, Suning in 2019, or anytime on Flash Wolves. This is not that Sword Art. I mean, he is one of the worst players in the entire league right now. It might be a mental thing. It might just be that he's past his prime. I don't really know what to say. He's just been awful. An easy choice for dead of the series here. He wasn't particularly good on the Nami in game number 2 either, where he just got completely run off the map by Missing's aggressiveness pretty much the entirety of the game. You could say the same thing about Pins in the mid lane, who was just not nearly on the same level as Knight. When you lose as a Akali into Lee Sin, that's pretty bad. And then you could say the same thing about Xiao Hao, which I feel really bad saying. Xiao Hao is definitely a channel darling, and I definitely want to cling on to that. I love Xiao Hao as a player, and I think he could be a really solid player for a top team, but I mean, it just feels like his mental has been completely broken. He's playing more supportive junglers now, which is not what you want to see for easily the only carryable player on AL. And also he's going into Kanavi on Maokai. Like, there's only so much he could do. ZDZ and 369 were basically nothing in the top lane until the late game. AL just looks completely helpless. Like, they are 0-5, and they look it. They are 2-10. This team does not look like they can keep up with basically anybody in the entire league right now, and it's frustrating to say the least, because I do think that this roster has talent. It's just seemingly not going to come to fruition in this season. They are the LPL's version of Excel. They are the LPL's version of Dignitas, whatever you want to say, right? They are the bottom of the barrel, the team that I think, they are the LPL's version of DRX, whatever you want to say. They are the team that is disappointing the most, I would say, in 2023. But for JDG, you're right at the top of the standings, 3-0. You've got another big, couple of series leading up in this week. JDG's finally going to have to start playing some games, but as long as they continue playing like they have through the first couple of series here, it's going to be no problem, because right now they genuinely do look untouchable. Moving on to day 2 now. We kicked off day 2 with another matchup between a team that really is streaking right now and a team that is streaking in the opposite direction. We had Invictus Gaming taking on LGD Gaming, and Invictus does get the job done. My predicted bottom 2 teams when the season started, that absolutely has not come to fruition. Invictus is much better than I gave them credit for at the beginning of the year. You Should Know Me is obviously fantastic, but there are a lot of things that have started to go right for this team more than just the top lane, and that's kind of what I want to talk about in this series. Yes, You Should Know Me was great in game number 1 on the Fiora. I definitely want to shout that out. A lot of people are going to give him player of the series for that Fiora game in game number 1, and I do agree with that. Like, he was the best player in game number 1 in particular, but game number 2, not exactly as spicy. I understand you're playing Cassante into Jax, and that's not exactly the most skill-oriented matchup for the Cassante. You kind of just have to sit there and wait for the Jax to not kill you so you can do your own stuff, but he was down like 100 CS, and so it's kind of hard for me to give him player of the series when he was down like 100 CS in the game. I understand he still did his job well, but for me, there was a player in this series that actually played both games at an incredibly high level, and that is On in the bot lane on this Zeri. Honestly, On and Wink have been the big reason that IG has been able to separate themselves from the mid-tier teams in the league, in my opinion. We've seen teams with one good player, especially in a position like top lane, sitting around, 12, 13, 14. Look at Rare Adam with a player like Cube. I feel like that's almost unfair to some of the other players on Rare Adam, but look at Rare Adam with a player like Cube, who is really solid and easily probably the best player on that team. They're not really competing for top 8, top 7, top 6. They're not beating some of these more interesting teams. They're not beating EDG like IG did. You Should Know Me is a very good player, but he has to be complemented by other good players, and that's what On and Wink really have been for this team. This bot lane has been extraordinarily good to start this year. One of the best bot lanes in the entire LPL so far this year, and I am entirely shocked to say that, because these two exact same players on this exact same organization were easily the worst bot lane in the LPL last year, and it wasn't particularly close. So to see them stepping up and be not just like good enough to play at an LPL level, but one of the best bot lanes in the region, it's incredibly impressive. And honestly, shout out to IG. I feel like the meta has been incredibly kind to them, but they've taken advantage of it in that same way. So On's gonna get my player of the series here. 2 really good games of Zeri. He just continues to look really good at positioning in these mid to late game team fights. That's really been his strength on Invictus Gaming, and hopefully that keeps up. And then you've got Wink. I mean, could you ask for a better meta for Wink? He gets to play Misfortune support. I mean, how much better could you possibly ask for? He gets to take out those Heimer turrets. He did play the Lulu really well in game number 2. I want to give him a big shout out for that. I would honestly argue that the Lulu game in game number 2 was more impressive than the Misfortune one in game number 1, which fills me with a ton of confidence, because if Wink can continue to play supports at a high level, at the same level he's been playing the Ashe and the Misfortune and the Varus and the other things that he's been able to pull out all split long, Invictus's bot lane is going to be able to keep up being one of the best in the league. I think Dove has also been really solid, either as a carry or as that supportive threat, like on the Galio in game number 1. Gideon has, been exactly what my expectations were. Going into the year, I thought Gideon was easily going to be this team's best player. I said that in my preseason predictions. Obviously, that was wrong, but Gideon still has been pretty solid, even if he wasn't perfect in this series. Overall, it just feels like IG is kind of clicking, and everything that they're doing, everything they want to do is kind of working out. As for LGD, frustrating loss here, but you're losing to IG, a team that has really been streaking and really been good over the past few weeks, so it's not the worst thing in the world, and honestly, you were kind of able to keep pace with them over the course of this series. Neither game was a complete and utter blowout. I would say your biggest lane difference is certainly in the top lane here. You Should Know Me, especially in game number 1, obliterated Xiaoshu, and while he was able to get a lead in game number 2, he really wasn't able to do anything on it, so Xiaoshu is going to get my dud of the series here. He just has not been good for LGD. I feel like top lane has been a weakness for this team in basically every series that they have played so far this year, which is a little bit disappointing. It's not particularly what you wanted to see for a young player coming into the league. He did have some promise. A lot of people liked him coming up. I was much lower on him than I think a lot of other people were, and I think that has unfortunately come to fruition. He doesn't really seem to play tanks. He really seems to only play carries, and he doesn't necessarily have this major impact towards the back half of the game. Seems like his laning is okay when he's going up against people that he can stay relatively even with, but outside of that, it just doesn't seem like he can survive at this level. I thought Meteor picking up Silas in game number 2, flexing that to the jungle was a really interesting proposition. Unfortunately, he didn't play it particularly well. He was relatively useless in that game number 2, and a lot of that second game was really on LPC and Jinjiao, and they've really been kind of the carry threats, I would say, for LGD over the course of the beginning part of the season, which isn't particularly surprising. I think they are definitely, LPC in particular, I'm not surprised to see, being given a lot of responsibility on this team. I will say, though, if he's the only one playing well, that's not a good sign overall for LGD. You need players like Haichao or XQW, whoever wants to play in the mid lane. You need players like Meteor to be able to step up and actually show that they can, relatively play at this level, because right now it feels like a two-man team, and that's just not good enough for anything other than bottom 2 in the league. And so overall for LGD, just kind of meh, right? They're just not a very good team, and that's not particularly surprising. It's just kind of disappointing to see, because this is an organization that I know a lot of people are fans of. As for Invictus Gaming, they continue their hot streak. This is a little bit of an easier series than what they've had to conquer in recent weeks with like EDG and other top teams, RNG even in that same vein. They've had to play a lot of really good teams in the league. I think LGD was a little bit of a nice reprieve for them, and they took it, and they looked great doing it. You Should Know Me, On, Wink continue to look dominant, and Gideon and Dove look like fantastic secondary pieces for this team. Invictus truly is one of the best, 8-ish best teams in the league, and I think that that's really, really fun to say and really, really fun to watch. Moving on to our second series here of day number 2, we had a battle between two teams that are, relatively speaking, I would say, fighting for playoff spots, both with the same record. We had Ultra Prime taking on ThunderTalk Gaming, and ThunderTalk is bouncing back. They had a really rough start to the year. They started 0-2. They were able to pick up that pretty massive win over Invictus by the end of last week, but they still didn't necessarily look as complete as a lot of people wanted them to look. I know a lot of people in their preseason power rankings had this team 8th, 7th in their preseason power rankings. I saw some people at 6. People were really high on this ThunderTalk team. I was very conservative. I had them at 11. I did not think that they were a playoff team just on paper, and I think unfortunately that kind of came true at the beginning of the year. I do think they are starting to find their groove a tad bit now, though, as we move into kind of the mid part of the split. This was a solid series. I'm not particularly a fan of the fact that they lost game 1 to a team like Ultra Prime. I do think that it was their game to lose, and they lost it, and that's unfortunate. Yucal, I thought, played relatively well in that game number 1, so did Wanfeng, but at the end of the day, Ning actually did a really good job on this Maokai, setting up plays for Doggo to be able to take advantage of on the Zeri. We've really watched Doggo have some good performances this year and some bad performances this year, and there's always been a constant in that, and that is Zeri. His play on Zeri has been very different to his play on a lot of other champions. He gets it in game number 1. He's able to carry in the late game here, and so Ning and Doggo actually looking pretty solid in game number 1, but after that, ThunderTalk just kind of takes the series and runs with it. They are for sure the better team across games 2 and 3 here, most certainly in that jungle mid duo, which I will talk about right now. My player of the series is going to go to Yucal in the mid lane. He was fine on the Akali in game number 1, but really where he stepped up were games 2 and 3. He played game 2 phenomenally on this Yone, a very, very good game. You always love to see a really proactive and a really dangerous Yone in pro play. I feel like that champion is super fun to watch when he's being played at a super high level, and that's what Yucal was able to show off here. And then I know he was caught a couple of times in game number 3 on this Jace. Wasn't exactly the most perfect game. Was out of position every once in a while, but he did such a great job in the early game setting TT up into being in that good spot in the first place that I'll kind of excuse some of his, mid to late game mishaps in terms of being in the side lane and positioning in team fights and et cetera, because I do think that he did a great job of setting the team up to be able to be there in the first place. So Yucal is going to be my player of the game. Definitely want to give a big shout out to Hoya in the top lane. He was very close to getting player of the game for me as well. A really good series from him. He's kind of just been a little, meh, I would say, on his time in ThunderTalk. He was pretty solid when he joined last year, but slowly I think he started to fall off a bit as we got closer towards the back half of the season, as ThunderTalk really disappointed towards the second half and fell out of playoffs. I think Hoya was definitely a part of that. This was a really good series from him. I thought his game 2 on Jax was good, but really, I want to talk about his game 3 on Cassante, where he really was probably the best and most consistent player on ThunderTalk in that game. You have Beishwan having a much better game in the jungle. This was a really good sign to see. He was really bad at the start of the year. He had a good series against Invictus, has another good series here against Ultra Prime in games 2 and 3. Game 1 wasn't particularly good on the Sejuani, but he really did step up in the last 2 games of the series. Obviously, he's going to be replaced. very shortly. I don't know when their superstar rookie jungler is going to be eligible to play later on in the week, but Beishwan's not going to be the starter for much longer. They've already basically announced that, and so he's already lost his spot after a really rough start to the year. That's unfortunate because I do like him a lot as a player, and I do think he's an LPL caliber jungler, but that top 3 really did step up here. I think Huanfeng and Yao Yao were really good in this series, and I want to point out, ever since Yao Yao joined, they have not lost a series. They're 2-0 after starting 0-2 ever since he was put back into the starting lineup as a support. I'm not going to sit here and say that it is, entirely on him, but it is worth noting that the team has been better once he came into the lineup, as someone predicted. Not that it was a crazy prediction, but he was in my Rookie of the Year voting last year for the LPL as a whole. To see him not get a starting spot at the beginning of this year felt pretty bad, and so good for ThunderTalk. Really good series overall for them, but mostly the solo laners really looking solid. And then for Ultra Prime, I'm just frustrated by this team. We kind of know what they are. We just saw back-to-back 17, 16, and 15 in my power rankings all play, and they really do look like the bottom 3 of the league. Even with FPX losing in game number 1, being number 14, I do feel like there's a gap between the bottom 3 and even like FPX at 14, who did, mind you, get destroyed. I still think these 3 teams are worse. Ultra Prime's going to feel very lucky to be able to walk out of game number 1 with a win off the back of Ning and Doggo playing relatively well. I thought Balan was okay in game number 1 on the Lulu as well, but games 2 and 3 were just not good for basically anybody on the side of Ultra Prime. My dead of the series is going to go to Ching in the mid lane. Another really bad series from him. He is not looking like an LPL caliber mid laner. Like, he is just getting beaten up by everybody he plays against. He's down 40 CS. He's down in kills. He's down in pressure, even on something like Talia against a Yone. I really don't know what happened, because he was good in the LDL. He was really good in the LDL, especially in the playoffs. I was notoriously lower on him than I think a lot of other people were. I saw people ranking him as one of the more interesting mid laners coming into the region this split, but I was a lot lower on him, and even then, I couldn't have expected him to be this bad. Harry is just not good enough in the top lane, and Ning, for as well as he did in game number 1, was completely running it in games 2 and 3. I mean, game number 3 in particular might be one of the worst jungle performances of the week. He was really bad here, and that's just not good enough. I mean, Ultra Prime right now is just not good enough. The solo laners continue to get outclassed basically every series that they play, and Ning and Baolan are just not good enough to be playing at this level. Doggo is trying in some of these games, but again, he's streaky himself, and so if he's your most consistent piece, that's not really going to be conducive to a lot of wins, in my opinion. So overall, just a mess series overall from Ultra Prime. Really not looking all that good. Like I said, bottom 3 have pretty clearly separated themselves, in my opinion, and Ultra Prime definitely is in that bottom 3, unless they upgrade in mid and in top and probably in jungle. I think this team is going to be one of the worst in the entire league. They just don't really have a lot of upside, in my opinion. But for ThunderTalk, that's the opposite. This team absolutely does have upside. We know how I feel about Huanfeng and Yao Yao in the bot lane. They can be one of the best bot lanes in the league if they click together. Yucal is playing just as well as he did towards the back half of summer at the end of last year, which is a really good sign for ThunderTalk fans, because he was really ramping up as the split went on. Hoya had a good series, and you're bringing in this superstar rookie jungler. We could be on the precipice of ThunderTalk breaking out and going on a big win streak and pushing themselves into the top 10, and I wouldn't be particularly surprised. But before I just kind of crown them in that top 7 like everybody else was at the beginning of the season, I do just want to see it on the Rift first. Now moving on to day 3 here, and we kick day 3 off with certainly an interesting matchup. A little bit of an upset here as we saw Bilibili Gaming taking on Team WE, and WE picking up another pretty massive win here. This is a team that has been right on the brink of a playoff spot for me in my power rankings all split long, and this may have just solidified it for me. This was really awesome and fun to watch. This WE team continues to improve. They continue to look very cohesive as a unit, and they continue to know how to get the most out of all of their players, even the ones that I would consider, not as good. But obviously it wasn't a perfect series overall. They ended up getting destroyed in game number 2, but a good bounce back in game number 3. Both of the games that they won were relatively clean, and I think that's the impressive part, right? Is it wasn't just, winning one game and then pulling another one out of your ass, at the end to kind of take a surprise win off of BLG. This really was beating BLG in a best of 3. They were the better team in 2 of these 3 games, which is really good to see. My player of the series is going to go to Shanks in the mid lane. who has had some really good performances this year. I've talked about it quite a bit on the channel. Shanks has actually been really positive for WE overall. He was easily this team's best player last year when they were really struggling, when this team obviously didn't win a single series. Shanks was definitely elo held a bit last year, but him and Bubu end up returning. You bring in Hang, you bring in Hope, you bring in Awandi, and this team definitely upgrades. I think all of those players are definitely carrying their own, but Shanks definitely looks a lot better here. He was just the better mid in this series. You can talk about the inconsistency, you can talk about his ability to play against some of the better mids in the region, both of which I do think are valid concerns and criticisms when it comes to Shanks. You know, he's not always great every single series. He does have some series where he pops off, and then he hasn't necessarily been great against like the best mids in the region, but he doesn't really have to be. He just needs to be a good enough mid laner in order for them to make playoffs, and that's certainly what he has been, is like a top, I don't know, 6 or 7 mid in the LPL, which is a pretty good thing to have. That's a really, really tough kind of market to break into, and I think Shanks is certainly in that conversation right now. He certainly wasn't the only one on WE who played well. I want to give a big shout out to Hang. Hang continues to play the exact same kind of style that he has played all year long, which is be incredibly solid in the early game and then kind of fall off a bit towards the back half. Luckily, he was able to get a lot of his laners ahead in this one so that they could carry him a bit towards the back half of these games, but Hang's early game presence has been incredibly strong. He was able to get that gank off on the top side early on in game number 1 to set Bubu up to be able to just beat Bin early on, and then obviously in game number 3, he was just kind of everywhere on the map, really trying to make sure that Hope and Awandi on the Jhin and the Ashe were in a spot where they could just kind of set up, be a little bit less paranoid about what was going to be going on around them, and just kind of play the game. So credit to Hang. I think he has a good sense of where he needs to be in the early game to get his team ahead. If only he knew how to transition leads into the mid game, I would feel a lot more comfortable with WE as a team, as like an upper team, but you know, he still definitely has some question marks when it comes to that side, and he was pretty heavily outplayed in game number 2, in my opinion. Not the only one, but certainly one of the ones that were outplayed in game number 2. Hope and Awandi looked really good in their wins. I don't want to say that Elk in particular was bad. I don't want it to seem like I'm trying to put down Elk by saying this, but they were much better than Elk and On in games 1 and 3. Elk and On were much better in game number 2, but really you just need to win 2 of 3, and that's what WE was able to do. They were kind of left on their own in game number 1, and Hope and Awandi still did a really good job. They've been a very big, pleasant surprise for me in terms of what they've been able to do without resources for this WE team. That was something that I was a little bit concerned about, was are they going to be hyper carries without a lot of jungle reinforcement coming out from the team? Turns out they can be, absolutely. Shanks and Bubu can get a lot of attention on the top side, and Hope and Awandi can still win their 2v2 as long as they are isolated in that. So overall, I just think WE played really well this series. There isn't really a lot of negative takeaways for me from the team. They didn't look particularly great in game 2. I thought Bubu and Awandi in particular were just kind of meh in game number 2, or Hope and Awandi, I should say, as a duo, were just kind of meh in game number 2, but doesn't really matter. You're allowed to lose one game in a best of 3 and still come out on top, so long as you look good in the other 2, and that's what everybody on WE did here. As for BLG, a frustrating loss. You definitely don't want to lose to a team like WE. You're trying to compete to be one of the best teams in the league. You were able to beat Weibo last week. Obviously, you know, it came out later after I published my video that Karsa was incredibly sick in that game. He was rushed basically to the hospital right after the series was over, so that could explain a little bit of Karsa's, you know, misperformances, underperformances, whatever you want to say, in that series. BLG definitely kind of underperforming in this one in particular, though. My dud of the series is pretty easily going to go to Yagao in the mid lane. He just doesn't seem to be able to mesh with the rest of this team. Him and June have no chemistry together, like literally none, and that's a bad thing for BLG overall. These are two very talented players, but if they don't work together, then it's not really going to matter. Yagao has always looked better when he meshes with his jungler. Now, I am going to go on a little bit of another small rant here. I already did my big one last week, so I don't need to go on it again, but I see a lot of people on Twitter and on, you know, Reddit talking about how it was stupid for BLG to pick up Yagao, about how no one could have expected Yagao to be a very good mid laner for this BLG team. And that, quite frankly, is just hubris. That is just folly. That is just not true, right? That is just reactionary analysis. Yagao was a top 10 player in the world last year, and it wasn't particularly close. Like, he was locked in that. He was a top 3 player in the LPL. Basically, no question for me last year. Him and Kanavi were the perfect jungle mid duo, in my opinion, the best in the world last year. And so to sit here and be like, oh yeah, a top team in BLG just shouldn't have thought about picking up Yagao, that is just like, I hate to curse, but it is literally just such bullshit that it is not even, it shouldn't even be on the mind of anybody. Yes, it's not working out, and yes, in hindsight, maybe, it's just not a great fit, but to sit here and be like, BLG was stupid for picking up Yagao, like, that is just, it's an uninformed statement. There is nothing else I can say about that. So, yes, Yagao is playing bad. Perhaps he can get back on the right track, or perhaps it might just be a bad fit between these two teams. I still think that BLG has a lot of time. Obviously, we're still very early on into the season. You have to remember, this is only their fourth season. They're only their fourth series, I should say. And Yagao still has plenty of time to be able to get, more on the same page as players like June, players like Bin, players like On, who I think he's just a little bit more passive and not as, aggressive, I think, as some of these other players mentality-wise. I think they can get on the same page. I just don't think they are right now. That isn't to say that everybody else on the team played well. I thought June definitely got outplayed here, especially on that Nidalee. In game number 3, obviously his signature Nidalee pick that he was able to dominate Karsa on in that previous series for Weibo, that he was basically able to win the series for BLG with. He just was not able to keep up with Hang in the early game. A really good early game from Hang. June got pretty far behind and he wasn't able to match. I don't really love this comp in game number 3. It's very feast or famine, and unfortunately it was kind of famine. Bin played really bad in game 3 on the Renekton, was constantly getting baited by Bubu on his signature Scion in the top lane. On was way too aggressive on the Pyke, was making plays that he absolutely had no business making. And then, like I said, Yagao was basically nowhere on the map the entirety of the series. Overall for BLG, there's some good, there's some bad. I think most of their problems are just cohesion. I really do think the talent on this team is still really good, but you're looking at a team with Bin, you're looking at a team with June, you're looking at a team with On. These are all very volatile players that we know can have bad games, players that certainly aren't inflappable, players that are going to be trying to make the risky, aggressive plays to push their team ahead. Sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't. Unfortunately, in this series, it just didn't work. They weren't able to get ahead. They weren't able to make a lot of the plays that they wanted to make. BLG is going to be a little bit more variance. They're going to have a little bit more variance just due to the fact of their players. I think you're hoping that Elk and Yagao can be a little bit of that stability for the rest of the team. However, Yagao's not really clicked, and, well, Elk, I think, did play really well in this series, especially in game 2 where he was fantastic. He certainly wasn't good enough in lane in the other 2 games to kind of keep the series alive. So, BLG still a good team, but maybe not the top 3 team that we thought they were going into the week. And then WE, absolutely massive win here. They continue to prove that they are much better than any of their competition give them credit for. If they continue playing like this, if Shanks can step up, if Hank can continue to have good early games, and if this bot lane can be as consistent as they have been, this is definitely going to be a playoff team, which, coming off of a season where you won 0 series, has to just feel like an absolute miracle. Then moving on to our second series here of day number 3, 2 teams that are above 500 and really pushing to kind of prove themselves as upper echelon teams. We had OMG taking on LNG Esports, and LNG picks up a 2-1 series win. They do prove that they are at least a little bit of a step above the young upstarts in OMG right now, but what a fun series. This was very back and forth, very close. Games 2 and 3 in particular could have really gone either way, and honestly, this was a bit of a banger. This was one of my favorite series of the week in any region. Really, really fun to watch. I highly recommend you go check it out if you haven't seen it already. Game number 3 in particular, definitely worth a watch between these 2 teams, but LNG is able to come out on top. They end up trading Elder for Nexus, as we've seen quite a few times happen, but we can't talk about Game 3, and we can't talk about LNG in this series without talking about Tarzan. He's on the Maokai in game 3. How much of an impact could he really have? He did 60,000 damage in this game. He built full AP, and he was like, I'm going to dominate. We've got a Tristana mid. We've got a Varus ADC. We need AP. I'm building full AP Maokai, and I'm going to do 60,000 damage. He was so devastatingly dominant in this game number 3. Without Tarzan's contribution, they don't win this game. It's not even close, really. His ability to be able to control early on into the game, all the way into being able to team fight stronger than anybody else in the back half. He was leading the game in damage the entirety of the way. It's just so impressive coming out from a Maokai in the jungle that I have to give him player of the series. I mean, there really is no other option for player of the series here. Tarzan's game number 3 was eclectic. It was fantastic. And I want to see more of this. This is the Tarzan that we have been missing. This is the Tarzan that we really didn't get in 2022. He was definitely more of a supportive, passive jungler, deferring a lot, I would say, to Doan B in the mid lane, really trying to make sure that players like Light were in a position where they could carry the games rather than himself, but that was not the case for this LNG team this year. Scout, I think, is much more comfortable playing these more, I don't want to say scaling-oriented mid laners, because it's not like Tristana and Jace are particularly, like, scaling-oriented mid laners. You pick them in order to win early as well, but they're okay not being the focal point of a lot of the resources. That's not necessarily the same with what Doenby was, and LP is certainly not light in terms of what his ability is to carry games in the late game, and so Tarzan definitely probably feels a little bit of an onus to be able to carry the early game a bit more than he did in some of the other games, and Tarzan with resources is still one of, if not the best jungler in the world. I know a lot of people tend to not put him in that conversation anymore after 2022, but he absolutely deserves to be in there, especially with this performance. So fantastic from Tarzan. Gotta give a lot of credit to Scout as well. I certainly don't want to take away from him. This jungle mid duo has been phenomenal for LNG and the big reason that they've been able to push forward. Scout's game number 1 in particular here on the Jace was really, really good, but he was also incredibly important in the game number 3 on Tristana, especially towards the back half in these team fights, really just outplaying Cream on the Kassadin, really creating a lot of opportunities for LNG, that jungle mid duo again, kind of pushing them forward. There were some mistakes made by the rest of this LNG team that definitely put them in some precarious predicaments. Zika in the top lane definitely has moments where he's a little bit feast or famine. He actually reminds me a ton of Ale on this team last year, where it's like some of these games he's going to look really good, some of these games he's going to look really bad. That's kind of what you're getting out of Zika so far, and then LP and Hang just aren't the focal point for LNG. They really haven't been, so a lot of pressure was being put on that jungle mid, and luckily for LNG, Tarzan and Scout are pretty freaking good at the game of League of Legends, and they were able to step up and win this series for them. On the side of OMG, definitely a frustrating series loss, but you really held your own against a very good LNG team. I think this series really proved that you deserve to be in this conversation around top 7, around top 6. Like, you deserve to be in that conversation. PP God in particular was fantastic. Again, big surprise here. I think Abel really stepped it up. This was probably his best series of the year so far. Was a little bit over-aggressive, but got his signature Samira in game number 3. Once I saw that in draft, I went, oh my god, like Cream on Kassadin, Abel on Samira, like they're gonna win this game. Unfortunately, they weren't able to pull it out in these late game team fights. Tarzan went absolutely nutty. Tarzan and Scout in particular went absolutely nutty. And Cream, I think, underperformed a tad bit, but credit to Abel and PP God. I think they were great. I thought Shanji was particularly fantastic in their win in game number 2 in the top lane without that Cassante on a lot of those engages coming out from Sejuani and Silas and Renekton. This very low, I don't want to say low damage because you're looking at the game 2 comp from LNG, but it is relatively low damage with Jhin Ashe to the bot lane. Cassante can be a really big problem, and he was a really big problem. There really wasn't a way to overcome that. He was able to kind of stop everything they wanted to do, and honestly, Cassante can still do a lot of damage. Shanji is just a really good top laner, and he was able to punish Zika a lot in that game too, was able to kind of push forward and then do a lot in the mid game, but credit to the rest of the team. I do think where OMG did start to falter in the series was that jungle mid duo. Now, credit to Aki. I don't think he was particularly bad. He just got outplayed by Tarzan, which is fine. Like, he didn't really make any major mistakes. He just wasn't the same as what Tarzan was, which is okay. You don't need to be that in order to be able to win a series, but Cream is going to get my dud of the series here. It's just unfortunate. He is a little bit of a hit-or-miss kind of player. He is very much a melee mid, assassin-oriented player. So when I see the Kassadin come out in game number 3, along with Abel's signature Samira, I'm like, oh my god, like, they're going to win this game. Unfortunately, Cream just gets outplayed. Like, Scout is so much better than him in game number 3 that it really doesn't matter that he's on a champion that scales infinitely here. Scout is just so far ahead. Tarzan's able to do so much damage. The Kassadin is constantly getting caught here by Maokai ult, or by Tristana jumping in, or Varus, or Leona, or Renekton. There's so many like CC tools to be able to keep Kassadin from really doing all that much in this series that unfortunately, Cream really wasn't able to get the ball rolling, so he's going to get my dud of the series, but it was honestly a not bad dud of the series, right? He was good in game 1, and he was really good in game 2 on the Yone. He just had a little bit of a down game number 3, and everybody in this series kind of played up to standards, and so he is unfortunately going to be the recipient of that dud of the series. But OMG, like I said, definitely proving that they belong here with the big boys up in the top 6, up in the top 7. They are a for real team, and I was very much right for putting them as high as I did in my preseason power rankings. Hopefully, they're going to be able to keep this up. PP God and Abel looked really good here. Shanji and Cream, we know, can win basically any series. They looked solid against LNG. I'm hoping they're going to be able to say the same against the other top teams. As for LNG, I mean, you're 4-0. You lost your first game of the year here in game number 2, but you still look basically untouchable. This team looks incredibly strong. Tarzan and Scout might be just the best jungle mid duo in the league right now in terms of how they are playing. Obviously, Kanavi and Knight might outscale them a bit in terms of talent, but Tarzan and Scout, just in terms of form right now, are top of the league. LP and Hang are doing exactly what they need to do, which is be a really strong weak side bot lane. And Zika, for being a little bit hit or miss, when he hits, he hits. And LNG is a really, really scary team because of it. This is a team that absolutely deserves to be in that upper tier conversation, and hopefully they can continue on with that, with this form and with this level of gameplay for the rest of the year. Jumping into day 4 now, we're getting close to the halfway mark in this video, and we kick off our day number 4 with a matchup between Edward Gaming and Ninjas in Pyjamas, and EDG picks up another really solid win here in 3 games, a 2-1 series win for them. Nip continues to just kind of plummet down the standings, plummet down the aisle of relevancy. Not a particularly inspiring series from NIP, but you are going up against EDG after all, so I guess it could be worse. It's not like you're going up against a bottom team. You did lose to a pretty good one, but EDG looking solid. I mean, there really isn't much else to say. Game number 1 was entirely in favor of NIP. They actually obliterated that one. Fodik got so ridiculously fed on this Zeri that it was basically game over after a couple of minutes. I mean, he ends up getting like 15, 16 kills in that game number 1. I mean, something ridiculous, right? Like, he just utterly dominates the game. Zhao Bao is super far ahead. In particular, Zhuo is incredibly strong here on the Yuumi. Everybody looking good in game 1, and then games 2 and 3 happened, and it is all EDG all the time. Game number 1 definitely looks like a fluke as we move further along into this series. My player of the series for EDG is going to go to Leave in the bot lane here. Obviously, Leave is someone who I was actually really excited about, I should say, coming into the year. I thought that he was going to be Rookie of the Year, that he was going to be the biggest LDL prospect coming up, and that he really was going to make his presence known basically immediately. I've been kind of right on that. I know he's been able to play with Mako, and that's definitely going to make you look a little bit better than perhaps you actually are, but Leave in his own right is really good at playing late game team fights, especially on these more hyper-aggressive AD carries. In my eyes, something like the Kai'Sa in game number 3 looked unbelievably good, and that's really the game that he's going to be getting player of the series for, is that game 3 on the Kai'Sa, where he was genuinely fantastic, although he was still really good in game number 2 on the Zeri. Being able to take that away from Fodik, being able to, put himself on that, be able to carry on it late game is a good sign. But he wasn't the only one who played well in this series. Big credit to Fofo. I've actually been very critical of Fofo on this channel. He's someone who, even when he was playing his absolute best at Rare Atom, a couple of years ago, I was still like, I don't know if I want to put him in like the top 4, top 3 mid laners in the region. It just feels a little bit high, and then he goes and has a really bad year on BLG last year, gets replaced by Icon, and Icon is a clear upgrade to him, so he gets another shot here on EDG. Really had a lot to prove, and he's honestly been really good for this team to start the year. One of the more consistent mid laners in the entire region, I would say, to start 2023, which is a good sign, I would say, for EDG overall. They were really relying on him being a really good carry out of that mid lane spot in order for this team to have any semblance of consistency, because you're looking at players like Ale, you're looking at players like JJ, and even a player like Leave, who is a rookie, and you're like, where exactly is the consistency going to come from? The feast or famine-ness of this team is pretty high, but Fofo has actually been really, really consistently good, especially on those assassins. His Akali game number 2 is particularly what I want to shout out, but those are the 2 players that I think really separated themselves for EDG. Another really good series for Mako. He continues to look like one of the best supports in the entire world, as he has for the past, 45 years or whatever it's been. This bot side of EDG really is clicking. JJ, I think, is really good at setting up plays, and then Ale just needs to not run it down in the top side, and this EDG team is going to be fine like they were in this series. But for NIP, I'm not going to hit the panic button, because you kind of did this to yourself, like, especially hearing about how the offseason went down and why you made a lot of the decisions you ended up making. Obviously, you didn't want to bring Rich back. You wanted to play Invincible, and honestly, I'm higher on Invincible and lower on Rich than I think a lot of people are. I think Invincible is much better than people give him credit for, and I think that Rich is a little bit worse than people give him credit for. I think people really want to sit here and say that if Invincible was out and if Rich was in, that all the problems would go away. I don't think that is even remotely the case. We know what Rich is as a player. We know that he is a bad laner, one of the worst in the league with very good team fighting mechanics, and he has been very successful on good teams in the past, but he's certainly not the kind of player that will make a bad team better. That is certainly not what Rich is. Rich will likely play to the level of his team. If his team is good, he's not going to make them worse. He's going to do the things that are necessary for them to be able to win games, which is mostly be in the right spot towards the back half. He's not going to make major errors, but he's also not really good enough to be able to carry a team. That's not what Rich does, and so I think having Invincible in, especially when your team is struggling, is honestly a positive. He was pretty good last week as well. I certainly don't think he's the major problem. You look at Fodik, and I know a lot of people are saying Fodik is trapped on this team, but we have to remember, I'm not going to sit here and say that the rumors are always correct, but the rumor is that Fodik did not want PP God as a support. He wanted Zhuo. He specifically asked the organization to go out and bring Zhuo in. And that's just not worked out. They really have not been all that good. They were fantastic in game number 1 here on the Zeri Yuumi. They looked unstoppable in that duo. And then that was taken away, and you know, they were really, really bad. You'll see the dud of the series here is going to go to Pout in the mid lane. We'll talk about the mid lane in a bit, but Fodic in particular, like, if he didn't have that game number 1, if he wasn't easily the dominating force in game number 1, he would have been an easy choice for dud of the series. He was out of position all the time, especially in game number 3 on the Varus. I mean, he was horrendous in the final 2 games of this series, but he was really good in that game number 1, so it's hard for me to justify giving him dud of the series. Zhuo hasn't clicked, and then Pout is coming in and playing the mid lane. You know, no Dream. Dream is out. He was really bad to start the year. Pout is in, and he wasn't particularly a problem for this team. He just didn't really do anything. He was completely out-macroed by Fofo. Fofo had complete control of the mid lane, was able to push that lane forward, allowed JJ a lot more flexibility, allowed Mako a lot more flexibility with the plays that they wanted to make. And Fofo did a really good job of capitalizing on it as well. And so this mid lane continues to be a problem for NIP. He's going to get dud of the series, but truthfully, like, Fodic was way worse in their losses. He was just also a lot better in their wins. NIP clearly has their problems. This team is now sitting at 1-4. If they don't turn things around soon, they're really not going to be a playoff team. I understand that their schedule has been pretty hard. They really haven't played a lot of bad teams. They've only played some of the best teams in the league, but still, I'm starting to get a little bit concerned about how this team is playing. It really feels like either Fodic pops off and they win, or he doesn't and they lose. And that's not really a consistent way to win when Fodic, in my opinion, is not a particularly consistent player at this level. I think mid lane has been a problem. I think support has been a problem. I think jungle has been up and down, and top lane's just kind of been there, right? Like, NIP doesn't really have a lot of super power points, and when Fodic plays like this, they're really never going to be able to win a series. As for EDG, this is another good win. You're sitting at 3-1. You would like to be 4-0, but you're sitting at 3-1. Fofo looks really good. Leave and Mako look really good. If Ale can have a couple of those pop-off games that he's been known to have for LNG, if JJ just continues to be a little bit more consistent than he was maybe in 2022, which is kind of what he's been so far in 2023, I think EDG is going to be right around this number 5, number 6 team that they've kind of been in my power rankings all year long. They are a solid roster. I don't know if they're going to be competing for the top of the league. I still have a few too many question marks about how this team is going to push forward to really believe that, but right now, they really do look like a lot of fun, and I'm really excited to see where they're going to be going for the rest of the week. Jumping into our second series here of day number 4, we had a matchup that we thought was going to be kind of a top-of-the-table clash at the beginning of the year. We had Royal Never Give Up taking on JD Gaming. And God, JDG is just unfair. Like, they just are completely and utterly unfair. They massacre RNG, and they look completely disinterested while doing it. I mean, it is actually absurd. They had a 14k gold lead at 16 minutes in game 2. Like, I don't really know what else to say. This team is just so much better than everyone else that they played against up until this point in the year that it's honestly kind of hard to get a grasp as to what they are, as to if they're actually good or not, because they are just outskilling everyone that they play against by so much that they never actually have to play the game. They never have to think. No macro is ever involved. I can't stress this enough. In game number 2, two people, Ruler and Kanavi, were doing Baron, while 369, Knight, and Missing were 3v5ing RNG, and they won. Like, I don't know what else to tell you. They won a straight 3v5, where Kanavi and Ruler, your jungler and your AD carry, weren't even in the fight, and they just demolished it. Like, that's how far ahead they were this entire game. It was legitimately ludicrous. I have nothing else to say other than that. The skill checks that JDG have been able to accomplish in this year so far are just unbelievable. Player of the series for me is going to go to Knight. I mean, 2 unbelievably aggressive games coming out from him. He outclassed his opposing mid laner so hard in both games, whether it was Tong Yuan in game number 1 or whether it was Angel in game number 2. He was so much better than both of them that it was just kind of ludicrous. I know Knight gets a lot of shit online from people who don't actually watch him play games and they just look at the box score of how his team plays. But Knight's a really good player. He's a top 2 player in the world, right there with Chovy, in my opinion, and he's absolutely earned that. I mean, Ruler's right up there with them at number 3. I think you could put, possibly put Kanavi at number 4, which is just, you're looking at a team of ludicrous players. We knew that going into the year, but it's felt unfair. Ruler gets a pentakill in this series, and he doesn't even play particularly well. Not that he plays bad. He absolutely dominates the laning phase, but the amount of times where he is just, like, out of position as Caitlyn and is not punished for it because the rest of the team is so far ahead, like, you could never actively punish him for it, is insane. It's really funny to watch. Honestly, this was just an outclassing and outperformance. Like, I don't really know what else to say. They were so much better. Knight gets player of the series, but you could give it to Ruler, you could give it to Missing, you could give it to Kanavi, you could give it to 369. JDG are just that team right now. They are able to beat everybody without really a lot of resistance. As for RNG on the other side, you know, this sucks. Like, your season has sucked so far. You're sitting at 2-8, and that is not really where you wanted to be. You try Tong Yuan against Knight in game number 1. I think they realized after game 1, like, how can we possibly expect Tong Yuan to be able to play into Knight? That's just an unfair expectation. So they put Angel in, someone who's at least played against Knight a lot in the past, and he gets utterly destroyed. I understand playing Akali into Jace isn't particularly fun, especially when the enemy team has an Elise that is going to be camping your lane anyways, but still, like, I don't know, man. Knight was just so much better than both mid laners. They're going to combine to get the dud of the series. This is more for Tong Yuan, who just got completely obliterated in game number 1 and clearly shows that he's just not ready for this level. Like, he is not ready to face JD Gaming. He's not ready to be on RNG and compete to be one of the best teams in the league. Like, it's just not where he's at in his development cycle. And that's fine. Like, I'm not expecting him to be, but it is a problem for RNG. Gala and Ming were outplayed by Ruler and Missing. Wei was completely out-jungled by Kanavi. Breathe got completely and utterly destroyed by 369. Like, there is no good takeaways from RNG in this series. There was nothing good that happened from this team. Like, I understand, looking at the scores, we've seen some bigger blowouts. Like, we saw AL, like, only get 2 kills in 1 tower earlier this week against JDG, but this felt worse. Like, this felt more demoralizing to me. I don't know why. Maybe it's because RNG is a better team, or maybe it's just because having a 14k gold lead at 16 minutes is legitimately unbelievable when you don't have a single champion on your team that accelerates gold growth. I don't know. RNG just looked completely lost, completely unplayable. I don't really have a lot of analysis, right? They just got utterly destroyed. I think outlook-wise for RNG, you're just hoping and praying things turn around. I don't think any series against JDG is an indicator for how good your team is overall, but RNG has been falling and falling and falling and falling down the ladder. I mean, they're sitting at number 9 in my power rankings. They very well could not be a playoff team. I mean, they're not playing like one right now. And with this roster, that is an absolute travesty. Even with Ming back, that is an absolute travesty. They really need to get their shit into gear, or else this team is going to be on the receiving end of a bottom, like, 7 finish, and that is as disastrous as it could possibly get for an organization that is already in disaster mode, off the rift. And then for JDG, I mean, what do you want me to tell you? They're 4-0, they're 8-1. Even the game that they lost, they looked okay, and, like, they're just better than everyone. There really is no other way to put it. They are just better than everybody. Later on in the week, they're going to get their first, like, big challenge of the year against Weibo, but, you know, if they play like this against even Weibo or any team in the world, really, I mean, talk about T1, talk about, you know, Gen G, any team in the world that they play against. If they play like this, they are legitimately unbeatable in my eyes, and that's a really, really scary prospect to have on the table. Moving on to day number 5 now, we had a matchup that was kind of interesting to watch. Certainly another team that is kind of capitalizing on some of these weaker teams in the region right now. We had Rare Adam taking on NE1's Legend, and Rare Adam picks up another series win here, although they took number 2 in pretty dominating fashion. Probably the most dominating game of the series was game number 2 in favor of AL, but RA is able to take game 1 and game 3 where they do look better in both. It is worth noting, RA, they're sitting at 3-2. I think they might be a pretty weak 3-2 team. Like, I don't necessarily just want to say that, right? But look at the teams that they have beaten. They beat NIP, which I guess on paper is a good win, but they certainly haven't been playing up to standards right now. And they beat LGD, 2 teams that just aren't all that good. And then AL, add them onto that list. RA, while they look pretty good record-wise, I just don't know if I'm super sold on this team as being a top team, especially when they're being beaten by AL in a game. It's not a particularly good look from them, in my opinion. But let's talk about what RA did right. Let's not talk about game 2. Let's kick it off with game 1 and game 3. Game number 1 was all Cube on this Renekton. Really, really good game from him. He continues to just be the best player on Rare Adam. In my opinion, he is just the driving force in pretty much all of these games. He basically never loses in the same way that a lot of the rest of this team loses. And even when he isn't, like, particularly driving the game forward, when he's, you know, just being solid in the top lane, like, he's never really a problem for this team. I think Cube is someone who could realistically play on a top-tier team and be right at home. Like, he could be a really, really solid top laner for a top 5 or 6 team. Unfortunately, he continues to be stuck on this Rare Adam team that just doesn't have a ton of talent, or at least consistent talent around him. I like players like Strive and Awesome. I think that they are pretty good. I think Leon certainly has his moments, but I don't necessarily think that on paper this is supposed to be some sort of top 10 team. I talked about that going into the year. I saw a lot of people with expectations that they were going to be a top team. I just wasn't sold. I thought Cube is a really good player, and that absolutely came true here. 3 games of Renekton, all 3 looking pretty good. Game number 2 wasn't particularly good from anybody on RA, but game 1, all Cube, he was really able to destroy that gangplank in the top lane and then be able to translate that lead into a late game kind of win for RA. And then game number 3, he was really influential on the Renekton in these late game team fights as well. But player of the series for me is going to go to Strive because of that game 3 performance. He looked good in game 1 on the RE as well. I don't want to take that away from him. Pins' Jace was atrocious from him, but, you know, shout out to Strive. He wanted to one-up him. His Jace in game 2 was also atrocious. He was easily the worst player in game number 2, in my opinion, although Leon certainly giving him a run for that money. But then that Sylas game 3, I mean, this is what Strive is all about. It looks like the Kassadin experiment is finally over for RA in the mid lane here because Strive is actually getting the chance to go out and play more proactive, more impactful champions in the mid lane, things like the Sylas that he was really good on last year, that he started to get a lot better on as the season went on. The solo lane duo here for RA does give me some hope that this team can be a team that competes for playoffs, you know, right there with teams like ThunderTalk and teams like WE. Like, I don't think it's that out of the realm of possibility for them to be in that conversation. I just don't know if I'd necessarily predict them to be in it right now, even with Cube and Strive playing relatively well. Southwind definitely still concerns me. Leon, when he has bad games, he just absolutely throws them away. And Awesome, you know, I heard a lot of people talking about him being elo held last year, and while I do think he was a lot better than the teammates he was around on LGD, I don't think he's some, like, top 8 or 9 ADC in the LPL or something like that. I think he's a good player, not necessarily a fantastic player. Someone who is good enough to be on RA and to kind of push it forward, but RA's problems continue to stay. They have no shot calling, they have no macro decisions, they make bad decisions towards the back half of games. It didn't really impact them here because they were just able to team fight their way out of these, but still something to keep in mind that RA's problems are not just going away after beating anyone's legend. Speaking of anyone's legend, another loss. You're sitting at 0-6. You're the worst team in the league. It's not particularly close. You are able to take like a surprising amount of games in these series that you do end up losing. Another 2-1 series loss here. They've had a lot of those this year, but for the most part, they're just not all that competitive. They have one good player on this team in Xiao Hao, and he did play really well in game number 2. Shout out to that Lee Sin, really good performance from him. I actually thought Pins and Betty were much better than they had been in previous series. Pins is someone who I really just want to see play well at this level. I really liked his LDL tape. I was really high on him as a player. He had a good Rise game in game 2, but again, only so much you can do with the rest of this team. And then Betty, super, super anti-proactive. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. He's just super passive in how he plays the game. He was able to get ahead in game number 2 on the Varus because the rest of his team was kind of pushing forward. Xiao Hao was incredibly strong on the Lee Sin, but outside of that, he's just not really able to do anything. The rest of the team is losing, so he is losing. He's not going to make this team better, but when they are playing well, he is going to look okay. Done of the series was pretty easy for me. It's going to go to ZDZ up in the top lane. He got completely destroyed by Cube in game 1 and honestly didn't even look all that good in their win in game 2. And then game number 3, he was just kind of useless on the Ornn. Overall, ZDZ has been very disappointing, I would say, this year. He was someone who I was putting right on that same level as Cube, a player that I think was solid for his position. Not somebody who was like this big superstar, you know, top player in the world kind of caliber, but someone who I could see being on an upper echelon team and not necessarily being a gigantic problem. He has not played well to start the year. He has been a little bit of an issue, and Cube absolutely destroyed him in this series. So ZDZ is going to get my dud of the series. And again, poor Xiao Hao. You know, we talked about Awesome potentially being elo held last year on LGD. Xiao Hao is elo held into oblivion right now on AL. Get him off of this team. He is way too good to be on anyone's legend, and I really hope that some actually relevant team comes around and picks him up, gives him an opportunity, because he is a really good player in that jungle position. He's just not really going to be able to show it off on this terrible, terrible team. But overall for AL, they're the worst team in the league. They continue to prove that they're the worst team in the league. Even with the win in game 2, they have one good player. It's just the rest of the team is not able to keep up. Sword Art continues to look bad. ZDZ looks really bad. Even though Pins and Betty had relatively good series compared to what they've been able to put out over the beginning parts of the year, I don't have a ton of confidence that they're going to be able to push this team forward and actually help them be able to win games. So AL, yeah, they continue to be the worst team in the league. Rare Adam, another good win. I've already dogged on him enough. I don't really want to sit here and be like, oh, it's a good win, but I'm not necessarily sure if they're going to be great. I've said it a lot in this review. This is a solid win, and you're sitting above 500, which is more than I expected. Credit to this team. I'm just not, you know, I have to say it, I'm just not entirely sure it is going to keep up once their schedule starts getting harder later down the year. Moving on to our second series here of day number 5. We had a matchup, another top team facing a bottom team, and it went, again, as you would expect. We had Top Esports taking on Ultra Prime, and Top Esports does the job. There is a lot of fun little storylines, I would say, that go along with this series. Obviously, Top Esports have two nice members of the Invictus Gaming 2018 Worlds champions with Rookie and JackeyLove reuniting. That's been really heavily talked about, but Ultra Prime bringing two more back here with Ning in the jungle and Baolan in the support position. We're only missing the Shy for that full 2018 IG reunion, which is kind of a cool little tidbit. Unfortunately for Ning and Baolan, it is clear who won the breakup, as Top Esports looking real good in this one. I mean, basically everybody on the team just kind of showing up and performing. They were able to take both games relatively easily. I gotta start with talking about the bot lane here. JackeyLove is going to be my player of the series here. You know, I'm really high on JackeyLove. I've been very high on JackeyLove for quite a long time. I know some people are low on him because he does make some mistakes, and, you know, there are going to be times where his over-aggressive mentality is going to cost him, but I always say, and you'll probably notice this from a lot of my other region reviews and things like that as well, and also some of the players that I'm a little bit lower on, aggressiveness is not always a bad thing out of the AD carry position, so long as you have the consistency to be able to do it most of the time, right? Like, I think a lot of people will look at my opinions on aggressive AD carries and see, like, oh, well, he only likes the ones that are a little bit more passive, the ones who are a little bit more consistent. You know, players like Light that I'm a lot higher on than I would say the average, you know, analyst would be. But I do like my aggressive AD carries. I think JackeyLove, in my opinion, is probably top 2, top 3 ADC in the world, and he has been for quite a while. I think comparing him to a player like Aiming, who I'm a little bit lower on than maybe consensus would be, the difference between those two is that JackeyLove is just, quite frankly, a lot better at it than Aiming is, where Aiming will have these moments where he will look like the best AD carry in the world, but he'll also have games where he's just not all that good, although I do think he's gotten a lot better at that. JackeyLove, the games where he's not all that good are even still pretty good. Like, his early games are basically never bad, and that's the consistency that I like. That's why I like Viper, that's why I like Ruler, that's why I like JackeyLove. It's why those kinds of players really stand out to me as some of the best AD carries in the world. But for JackeyLove, pairing him up with a player like Mark, I always talk about it, really did unlock the best out of both of them. Both of them look fantastic on the Lucianami, on the Varus Heimerdinger, on basically every lane that they've played together this year and last year. They've looked really good. I see a lot of people saying that Mark should be a target for being replaced, like he's not good enough to be on this roster with the rest of the superstars on Top Esports like Tion and Rookie and JackeyLove. I think that would be a massive mistake for Top Esports, that JackeyLove and Mark have developed a really nice chemistry and synergy together in that bot lane, and I think it would be problematic to let one of them go. I think both would suffer, and so JackeyLove getting player of the series here, Mark looking good, Tion looking really good. Some really aggressive plays coming out from him on the Maokai, on the Vi. Really do like that. Obviously, he continues to be really solid. Not necessarily the MVP that he was last year, but still solid. He was going up against one of the worst junglers in the league, so not necessarily too surprising that he was able to take him down, but still solid. Rookie is Rookie. He's going to be incredibly consistent, and he dominated that mid lane matchup, that mid lane 1v1, which was just very problematic on the side of Ultra Prime. And then there's Xingtian in the top lane. I know a lot of people are really out on him. I'm much higher on him than I think a lot of other people are. Not that I think he's a superstar or anything like that, but he's certainly not going to be the type of player that holds Top Esports back from being a top 2, top 3 team in the region. Like, he's just not that bad. We've seen significantly worse players on better teams, and so I think he's fine. He plays these tanks incredibly well. He's going to be a little bit aggro in the early laning phase. Sometimes you're going to be able to take advantage of that, but when you play things like Cassante, when you play things like Sion, you're going to just be able to be a little bit more aggressive and get away with it. And overall, I think Top Esports is just kind of clicking on a good cylinder right now. I think that they are proving that they deserve to be in that top 2, top 3. As for Ultra Prime, I think they are proving that they deserve to be in that bottom 3 over and over again. Mid lane is continuously a problem for this team. Ching is going to get my dud of the series again for the second time this week. Another really bad series from him, a particularly bad game on the Renekton where he plays it into Ryze, and like theoretically speaking, you can win that matchup, but it is very difficult to play that out, especially into a player like Rookie, and it's very bold to pick that in draft, and he just was not able to execute on that. You go for SuperKmarma in the bot lane to try and be able to poke out the Varus and the Heimerdinger to try to just be able to outrange, you know, scale into the late game. That ends up not working. Harry's not good enough. Ning had an atrocious series here. Really, it was jungle mid that I thought got completely overrun for Ultra Prime. They were the biggest problems, but nobody on this team played particularly well. That's the same as earlier on in the week. Ultra Prime is just not that good. Like, it really is the case, right? Anyone's Legend, LGD, and Ultra Prime, they are clearly the 3 bottom teams in the league. And I think Ultra Prime proved that again. I think mid lane might be a position that they need to either look to change, or, you know, if you're just okay with losing, give Ching time to, you know, see if he can develop and get better, because right now it's not working. He is easily one of the worst players in the LPL, and it's not particularly close. Ning is right up there with them. Baolan has been bad. Harry has not been particularly good. Doggo is incredibly inconsistent, especially when he gets his Zeri banned. That's just kind of what we get with Ultra Prime. They're really inconsistent and not very good, and so outlook-wise, they're just not a very good team. I don't expect them to be able to climb the standings all that much. This is a team that is probably just going to be looking to develop some of their younger players rather than trying to win right now, which is frustrating because you've got 2 veterans on this roster that probably should be looking to get replaced. As for Top Esports, another good win for them. This team is legitimately one of the best in the entire world. I know people aren't going to look at them like that because they don't like Qingtian and they think he's underperforming and Jackie Love is way too volatile and, something about Mark. But they really are. Like, they play like a unit. They play cohesive. They play strong together. It's going to be interesting to see what happens when they go up against some of the other better teams. We saw them go up against Weibo and not be able to handle that earlier on in the year, but Weibo can beat anybody in the world when they are on, and so Top Esports versus JDG, that's going to be fun. Top Esports versus BLG versus LNG, EDG, these are the series I'm really going to be looking for to see what this Top Esports team really has in them after all. We're going to keep the blowout train rolling here as we jump into day number 6. Of course, the start of our super days here in the LPL, the 3 series days instead of 2 over the weekend, and we kick that off with a matchup between ThunderTalk Gaming and LGD Gaming, and ThunderTalk rocks and rolls them in this series. ThunderTalk looking really good this week, honestly. After a really shaky start to the year, obviously starting 0-2, not exactly what you wanted, they really have rebounded really, really well. Obviously, they still don't have their full roster in. Beishuan probably playing his final series here, which is super unfortunate because he has been playing really well over the course of these last 3 series, their last 3 wins. And, obviously their superstar rookie jungler seems to be coming in at the beginning of next week, the beginning of week 5, but Beishuan absolutely deserves to be starting in the LPL, especially after this performance. I very narrowly did not give him player of the series. I think he actually quite deserves it. Huanfeng is going to get it here, and Huanfeng deserves it more, but that's not to say that Beishuan doesn't. I think if you played like this every series, like 99 times out of 100, you're going to get player of the series, unfortunately. Huanfeng was also incredibly fantastic in this series, and we'll get to him in a second, but I just feel bad for Beishuan because it feels like he has stepped up his performance so much in the recent weeks ever since Yao Yao has re-entered the team, and it really does feel bad that he is going to get replaced no matter how well he plays in a lot of these games, or at least that is my presumption, that he is going to get replaced no matter how well he plays in these games. So shout out to Beishuan, completely outplayed Meteor, who had a horrendously bad series, and just looked fantastic. Honestly, everybody on LGD did, but mostly Meteor and then the bot lane. The other players that I gotta shout out this bot lane for ThunderTalk. I know a lot of people are really out on Huanfeng going into this year. I don't really understand why. I feel like a lot of the people who were out on Huanfeng going into 2023 didn't watch Weibo last year, didn't realize that, yeah, the Shy was winning games for them, especially towards the back half of the year. He was really stepping it up, but for basically all of spring and then the first half of summer, it was Huanfeng and On just like playing their hearts out, trying to absolutely dominate in the bot lane, or else that team had zero chance of winning any games. SOFM, Angel, they were playing so bad, and the bot lane was hard carrying Weibo. I think a lot of people forget how good Huanfeng was. He was in the conversation for my all-pro teams last year. He really was that good. You pair him up with another really good young support here in Yao Yao, and he honestly looks great. Ever since Yao Yao came in, he's looked fantastic. That Draven game in Game 2 in particular was incredibly fun to watch. Obviously, we know he can carry these games, especially going up against worse bot lane talent. It's just really comforting to see him be able to do it on a team like ThunderTalk. I think I was going into this year feeling like Huanfeng on ThunderTalk was going to be a little bit more similar to someone like Elk last year on Ultra Prime, where it was like, oh, okay, I see. Like, Elk is a really good player, but the rest of this team isn't able to keep up. I was worried that that was going to be the case for ThunderTalk. It has not been so far. Yucal has been very good in the mid lane. He was good again. Hoya's actually been surprisingly good on the top side in their wins, and then, like I said, Yao Yao and Beishuan have really stepped up, and especially if their new jungler comes in and plays at this level as well, that's going to be very, very positive for ThunderTalk overall. As for LGD, frustrating loss. I mean, again, you're a bottom 3 team and you got absolutely floored. It's not particularly surprising. ThunderTalk is a much better team than you are, but still getting absolutely floored probably never feels good. It's kind of the same candidates, although, you do have a little bit of a positive to take away here, and that's that Haichao in the mid lane actually had a really good game too on the Akali. He kept that one relatively close. That one went 33 minutes. It would have gone 19 if it weren't for Haichao on that Akali. He really was able to keep up. He was actually outpacing Yucal for a lot of that early game on the Casio, and was doing a really good job of trying to spread that, love, that dynamic, that power around the rest of the map. Meteor back on the Sylas. This has continued to not work in the jungle so far for this LGD team. I understand that Meteor likes to play it, but it's clearly not working. And then the big two duds of the game here are going to be Xiaoshu in the top lane, who just continues to look like maybe the worst top laner in the entire region right now. And then LPC in the bot lane, who is going to get my dud of the series here. He got completely and utterly outplayed by Huanfeng. LPC has kind of been the driving force for LGD in their win earlier on this year against AAL, even in their other game wins. It's often been this bot lane kind of stepping up. LPC got obliterated in this series, and that was a big reason why LGD just had absolutely no pressure on the map. With as good as Haichao played, I feel kind of bad that the bot lane finally chose this one to be the big, like, pulling down force, like the big anti-winning force for LGD, but unfortunately, that's sometimes just how the cookie crumbles. This LGD team is not particularly good. I don't really see a lot of upside for them to turn into being good. You have a lot of older players on this team as well, and you're not winning, so I don't really know what the entire intention of LGD is right now. Meteor's playing bad. LPC had a really bad series. Xiaoshu might be the worst top laner in the region. Obviously, a lot of these players have room to grow, most especially both of these mid laners, both Haichao and XQW. I think those are the two players that I like the most in terms of the long term for LGD, but right now it just doesn't feel like any of them are really performing at a level that is needed in order for them to grow in any meaningful way. And then for ThunderTalk, honestly, you're right back on track. You're sitting at 3-2. You're sitting at 6-6 in terms of overall game record. This is totally doable for the rest of the year now. You're actually in a pretty decent spot. If you can continue to keep up this pace where you actively look really, really good. I know it's against a really bad team in LGD, but if Huanfeng and Yucal and this jungle position and Yao Yao and even Hoya in the top lane can continue to play at a relatively strong level like they did all of week 4 here, ThunderTalk is going to be one of those teams that genuinely does compete with some of the other teams that are looking to make it into that top 10. That, 8 to 12 range right now, even 13, is really wide open, and ThunderTalk are absolutely making a case right now to be near the top of that list. Moving on to our second series here of day number 6, we had a fun matchup between Invictus Gaming and FunPlus Phoenix. Back-to-back World Championship winners in 18 and 19, but both definitely still trying to recover from the last few years. Invictus doing a pretty good job. FPX maybe not so much. Invictus with another 2-0 series win. Game number 2 was a demolition. Game number 1, holy crap. I mean, shout out to this Lucian. I mean, utterly dominant. I know we've been talking about You Should Know Me for the side of Invictus Gaming, and we deserve to be. He has been very good. He has been fantastic. He has been a star on the side of Invictus Gaming, but I have to say, this might be a little bit crazy. Maybe I'm wrong about this. I feel like On and Wink are the best players on Invictus right now. Like, they are just so ridiculously in sync and good together that it is just almost unfair to have to go into them. Like, that Lucian Nami game number 1, unstoppable. I have not seen an 80 carry pop off like that in a very long time. And I understand that On had a lot of help, and don't get me wrong, big credit to Wink on the Nami, big credit to Gideon on the Poppy, who had a phenomenal game in game number 1, but On was still the one who had to do a lot of the damage, and he absolutely did so. The rest of the team was fantastic at being able to enable On in order to do that damage. You Should Know Me in the top lane doing a really good job of that as well, but like, you have to give credit to On as well. This entire team is just kind of clicking in that way. And then game number 2 was another decimation. You Should Know Me completely pops off on the Camille in the top lane, destroys the Cassante there. Dove has a really good game on the Azir. On it, Wink are fantastic on the Varus Heimerdinger. Really, it just feels like nothing can go wrong for this Invictus Gaming team right now. I do want to say they have faced less than stellar talent in recent weeks. Now, obviously, this team can still be one of the top 4 or 5, even 3 potentially teams in the LPL if things really keep clicking like they are, but other than the EDG win, I haven't really seen something on their resume that really makes me go like, wow, like that's huge. I want to see them face off against BLG. I want to see them face off against Top Esports, against Weibo, against JDG. Those are the games I really want to see from Invictus at this point, but right now they're really looking fantastic. I mean, they look untouchable. On and Wink in particular just look utterly dominant and utterly unstoppable. As for FPX, rough loss here. You weren't on the same level as Invictus Gaming. I mean, this is a team that looks like they're in 14th. I've talked about the bottom 3 kind of being in their own tier. I still think FPX is a little bit more talented than the bottom 3, but this game and this series doesn't give me a ton of confidence in saying that. LWX was a big reason why I believe that. Care as well, another big reason why I believe that, and both of them were pretty horrendous in this series here. LWX is going to get my dud of the series here. If you would have told me at the beginning of the year that On and Wink would be miles better than LWX and Lele, I would be like, you're lying to me. You are literally trolling stop, playing games. But that's just the truth of it. On and Wink have been one of, if not the best bot lane in the LPL, and LWX has just not been able to step up in 2023. It seems that losing Hang, losing a lot of the other talent surrounding him on FPX here has just hurt him a lot, and he's really not been able to step up and make it work. He has been, quite frankly, bad for this FPX team over the course of 2023 so far. Hopefully he can step it up. Him and Lele don't really seem to have any chemistry, but as long as those two aren't playing well, I don't see FPX having a pretty decent shot at making playoffs. And then Care, who was actually playing well earlier on in the season when FPX really was keeping, pace, I would say, with a lot of these other teams. Care was the one that was kind of stepping up. Well, that's not the case anymore. He was really bad in the series, got completely outplayed by Dove in the mid lane matchup, and Dove has been pretty good over the course of the year so far, but I would say that Dove is kind of the weak link of Invictus Gaming, and for Care to just not be able to have any sort of relevance in that mid lane matchup is definitely disappointing. Hacker continues to be bad. Zhao Lao, who got destroyed by You Should Know Me in Game 2. Overall, FPX is just not at the level of a team like Invictus, and that's definitely frustrating to say. This is a team that definitely feels like they're in that lower tier, that D tier. Not exactly an F tier team, but a D-tier team. They really don't feel like they're even remotely within range of playoffs. A lot of things would have to change. A lot of things would have to go right for this FPX team in order for them to kind of push forward into that playoff, top, 10, 11, 12 spots, because right now they do feel relatively solidified. Even 13 feels a little bit out of reach for FPX at the moment. But for Invictus, I had them at number 8 going into the week. I don't really know where exactly to put them because on paper, they should eventually fall off, but they are just playing so far above expectation right now. I'm really going to be excited to see them start facing off against some of the better teams in the upcoming weeks. It's going to be a real big test for Invictus Gaming. They've really only had to face EDG and I guess RNG up until this point in terms of like top tier teams. Once they start facing some of these other big powerhouses, we're really going to get a good idea for where IG is in terms of the grand scheme of the LPL. But right now, this bot lane looks untouchable. You Should Know Me looks like a superstar in the top lane, and Gideon and Dove are doing a great job accentuating the rest of the team. Honestly, IG is just a very fun team to watch, and I think I speak for everyone when I say we just hope that they can keep this up. Moving on now to our final game here of day number 6, and it was our matchup of the week. Two of the best teams, arguably the two best teams in the LPL going head-to-head. We had JD Gaming taking on Weibo Gaming. And JDG, the Kings crumble. Weibo is able to take the series in 3, giving JDG their first loss of the year. Unbelievable. Great series overall from both teams. I gotta give them both a lot of credit because I actually think both of them played really well. This is definitely a series I would recommend you go check out and rewatch, especially game number 3. Super back and forth, super fun to watch. But let's go ahead and diagnose it. Obviously, game 1 goes in favor of Weibo, but it is very close, and it is honestly a really, really huge performance coming out from Crisp on the Ashe. Very, very important arrows coming out. He was able to do a lot of damage and really accentuate Xiaohu on this Tristana, who was able to take over a lot of the mid game. Those were kind of the two main forces. And then in game number 2, you had 369 on this Gragas, who was really just dominating the Shy. I mean, there really is no other way to say it. 369 was so much better than the Shy in this series, and that was really shown no more than in game number 2, where 369 absolutely pops off on the Gragas. You've got some really good contributions coming out from Kanavi on the Wukong, and Knight on the Sylas, and Ruler on the Varus, and Missing on the Ashe, and everybody played well in game number 2 on JDG. And then game 3, back and forth, and back and forth, and back and forth, and we end up getting to this point in the game where we've got a Baron fight, we've got a potential Baron steal, and that's exactly what happens. We've got JDG controlling the pit, we've got Ruler stepping up a tad bit too much, getting caught, Knight going in, trying to blow up Light on the other side to trade for it, just barely missing out on the kill, I think by literally like 20 HP, like something ridiculous, like one more auto attack would have just killed him on the spot. And then Xiaohu steals the Baron. I mean, about everything that could have gone wrong for JDG in that moment went wrong, and they end up not being able to recover. They end up losing the game off of that play. They had really nice control over game number 3 up until that point, but that just ended up being the nail in the coffin, if you will. Player of the game for me, or player of the series, pretty easy choice. Gonna go to Crisp on the side of Weibo Gaming. He was legitimately fantastic in this series. Not only was the Ashe game in game number 1 perfection, but he just really does play that Nami a bit differently. He is proving to be one of the best supports in the entire world, like full stop. He has been fantastic. Him and Light seem to play really well together in the lane 2v2, but Crisp in particular, I think has really been the standout for Weibo early on in the season. Him and Karsa have been the big standout players for me. Xiaohu also was really good in this series, a really good game number 1 on the Trist, but all people are going to remember are the damage numbers that he was able to do in game number 3 on the Syndra, not the Sylas, on the Syndra, and then also, of course, the Baron steal, the really important part that he was able to do, and so Spring Zhao, who strikes again, him and Crisp were definitely the MVPs for Weibo in this series. Not that Light and Karsa were bad. Karsa certainly had moments where he was a little bit over-aggressive, but he was playing some champions that I think he could get away with that on. My dud of the series is actually going to stay on Weibo, though, because it is going to go to the Shy. And now, I want to jump in on this a bit before we talk about it. I know a lot of people are going to be like, look at how useful he was in Game 3. I understand he went 1-16, but look at how useful. Look at the damage numbers that he put out. You know, look what he was able to do in the late game team fights. And yeah, I completely agree. His game number 3 really wasn't all that bad, even if the score was not all that good. That does not excuse his Game 1 and Game 2, where he was probably the worst player in the series through the first 2 games by a large margin. Game number 2 was easily the worst game that anybody on either team played. He got utterly obliterated by 369 when he was on Renekton, and it wasn't particularly close. Think of this dud of the series as Game 2, because Game 2 was so bad. He was really bad in lane in games 1 and 3, too. He just was able to pull it back, especially in game number 3 and a lot of those late game team fights. But the Shy simply has to be better. I know they were able to beat JDG even without him being good, but think about how good they could have been had he actually been good. They wouldn't have needed a miracle Baron steal. They wouldn't have needed Knight to just barely miss out on the kill on Light. They wouldn't have needed Ruler to completely misposition that final team fight as Zeri. Like, they wouldn't have needed all these things to go right for them. They could have been able to actually be a little bit more proactive in a lot of these plays. And so Weibo definitely still has a ways to go before I truly believe they are, like, without a doubt, the best team in the region, because their variance is just still really high for me. But great series here for JDG. You should have won. Like, there really is no other takeaway. You absolutely should have won this series. Credit to 369. I thought he played really well this series. So did Kanavi, and so did Knight. I thought those were the 3 real standout players. I thought Missing was also pretty good here. He just wasn't exactly flashy. Ruler was a little bit of the problem for JDG, which is kind of crazy to say, but his positioning mistakes are really starting to come out. He's starting to get a little bit more aggressive. Maybe the LPL starting to rub off on him in a bit, but we talked about this in the previous series that they had where, you know, his positioning mistakes just couldn't be punished because the team was so far ahead and he was able to kind of just beat everybody 1v2 or 1v3 that 80 carries just shouldn't be able to do that. Well, now it's a series where he's not able to kind of just get away with some of those positioning mistakes, and they actually come back to bite him, especially in that game number 3 on Zeri. He's always been a little bit over-aggressive with his positioning in some of these team fights, but we know that when it matters the most, he will step up and he will do a really good job with that positioning. And so I don't really worry too much about Ruler. He was just a little bit of a negative in this series and in game 3 in particular. But overall, JDG really should have won this series. They had game 3 in the palm of their hands and they threw it away off the back of a very bad Baron call, a really, you know, just a tragically bad Baron fight, and then having the Baron get stolen. It was just about as disastrous as it could have gone for JDG. I think they end up winning the series and we're looking at it quite differently, but that's not where we're at. JDG suffers their first loss of the year, and they definitely figured out, you know, where their flaws are, and that is, you know, maybe being a little bit too aggressive, maybe being a little bit too confident in their plays. Maybe just getting back to playing a little bit more standard league is going to help them a bit. But for Weibo, I said this earlier, they can beat anybody in the world when they are on, and that's what happened here. They beat the super team, they beat the best team in the world in JD Gaming, and they looked pretty good doing it. Not even their top laner was playing well, and they still were able to pick up that win. Crisp and Light look really good in the bot lane duo. Karsa and Zhao, who have a really nice synergy as that mid-jungle duo. One of them seems to always be stepping up and getting those resources. Overall, I would say that Weibo genuinely does look like one of the best teams in the entire world, and they very well could be the best team in the entire world when they're playing at their absolute best. It's just that variance and that inability to play incredibly consistently does scare me a bit, but I can only be scared so much after a fantastic win like this. That brings us to day 7, our final day of games here in the LPL, and man, this video is always incredibly long to make, but we kicked off day number 7 with a matchup between LNG Esports and Ninjas in Pyjamas, and NIP actually picks up a major upset win here, a huge one to get their season right back on track, and this is exactly what they needed. I mean, seriously, this could not have come at a better time against a better opponent, because LNG was rolling. Like, this team was looking unbeatable, and even against some teams that I would consider relatively good. I know, you know, not a lot of people are going to be on the same train as me for OMG, but I think LNG beating up on weaker teams is and maybe an exaggeration more so than some of these other teams that we've talked about that maybe don't get that designation. And I think the same can be said about NIP losing to the best teams in the league. Losing to Rare Atom is not exactly a loss I would consider one of the best teams in the league. But at the same time, you know, this is still a good win for NIP. I think this proves that hopefully they're trying to get back on the right track. I think everybody on this team played relatively well. let's go ahead and talk about it. Game number 1 was actually a really solid game from Pout coming out of the mid lane here with the Ryze. I really liked how he was able to control the map early on. I'm not a particularly huge fan of like Kennen, Maokai, Ryze as your top side with Jhin and Ashe as your bot lane. It feels like you are incredibly passive towards the back half of the game. If you're not ahead early, then you're going to be completely doomed here. But Pout did a really good job of being able to create a huge macro advantage, just honestly being able to outplay Scout with getting the push and then being able to move around the map. And then Photic did a really good job of cleaning that up. And then game number 3, their other win was all Photic. It was all Zhuo and Photic in the bot lane. Ezreal, Ashe, I never thought would be such a demandingly good duo, but God, it was scary to run into that. And I know we'll talk about this in a bit. We'll talk about LNG when we get there, but playing that especially into an engaged support just felt literally unwinnable on the side of LNG. Like, it legitimately felt like there was no chance that they were ever going to get any sort of advantage in that bot lane. Photic's positioning on Ezreal is incredibly top tier. He did a really good job in this series of being able to stay alive and being able to output damage, but I gotta give player of the series to Zhuo. It would be very, very disingenuous if I didn't. Zhuo was phenomenal on 3 games of Ashe. Not only were the arrows perfect, his laning 2v2 was improved so much from everything that we saw before in this season, and honestly, his ability to do damage in the late game was a big factor of bringing game 3 back and making sure that Photic could carry a lot of this late game. You've got the Sion, you've got the Maokai, you've got the Azir, but the Ezreal and the Ashe were really stepping up and being the focal points, I would say, in that game number 3. So Zhuo's going to get my player of the series. This was the kind of performance that he really needed to have, to step up and really just look like the best player in the series. I know a lot of people are going to want to give it to Photic, and I understand. I know a lot of people are super high on Photic, and I know I'm, like, notoriously low on Photic as a player. Like, it's almost part of my brand at this point, but I want to just do a little bit of a soft aside. I saw people on Twitter and on Reddit talking about how, like, oh man, Photic is elo trapped. I want to see what he looks like on a top team. And I'm like, where have you been? Like, who are you? Did you just start watching the LPL this year? This is the first time in his career that he's not been on a super team. He was on the top esports team that, you know, while they didn't end up, you know, actively performing up to their level, was like a year away from being a world championship caliber team, a top 4 team in the world. And then last year's Victory 5 team absolutely should have made worlds, but Photic shit the bed in playoffs. Like, he could not get it done. This is Photic, right? Like, this, he's going to be a very good player for this level, for like 10, 9, 8. I'm not exactly sure he's the kind of AD carry that could thrive on like a top 3, top 4 team. But maybe I'm wrong. You know, maybe the last 2 times that he was given the opportunity to do so just were bad examples and didn't work out. He was really, really good in this series, especially on that Ezreal in game 3, but Jhin cannot break through. I need teams to stop picking Jhin unless you are specifically going into like Zaya or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, those are the circumstances in which that you can pick Jhin, but I'm tired of seeing Jhin into low, like, with low damage comps. It just doesn't really work out like we saw in game number 2. But Zhuo and Pout were both really good. Invincible and Zhao and Bao continue to be solid on the top side. I honestly think this was NiP's best series of the year by far, even their other win. This was easily the most convincing, and honestly, it gave me a lot of hope because it was the 2 players that I was most concerned about in Pout and Zhuo that really stepped up and played well. As for LNG, it's a tough way to get your first loss of the year. I know people are going to say that their record is inflated from beating bad teams. You know, bad teams like ThunderTalk, bad teams like OMG, you know, terrible teams at the bottom of the standings. Obviously, jokes aside, this is a rough loss for LNG. You would have liked to keep the undefeated train rolling here, but honestly, I hate a lot of these drafts. I hate engagers right now. I just think they're so useless. Into Ashe, into Ezreal, like, how are you ever going to engage here? And that's exactly the problem that they ran into. This bot lane ended up losing pretty hard. LP was able to pull a lot back in a lot of these late game team fights through to some really good positioning on the Varus. He was actually doing a good amount of damage, but Hang was so ridiculously useless in this series that it's a very easy choice for dud of the series. I'm not just going based off of the fact that he had 22 deaths across 3 games. That is pretty bad, but that's what happens when you play engagers and you lose. Like, I understand that sometimes your KDA is going to be a little bit deflated from your team losing, but this was the fact that Nautilus, Leona into Ashe 3 games in a row, and it never worked. Like, it was never positive. Even in game 2, when they won, it was not positive. That game was off the back of Scout looking pretty good on that Ryze, and LP doing a ton of damage in the late game team fight on Varus. Even Zika looking okay on the Fiora, and Tarzan looking okay on the Lee Sin. The rest of the games were just doomed from that support position. Scout had basically no impact on the final couple games of the series. Tarzan was kind of negative, I would say, on the Zac. It's a pick I really like for him, probably his signature pick. That and the Sejuani are the 2 things that my brain kind of goes to when I think of Tarzan. Zika was running it a bit in the top lane, but that's what you're going to get out of Zika. He's just going to play a little bit over-aggressive at times. I would say overall for LNG, it's a frustrating way to lose your first series of the year, but it certainly doesn't mean that you're knocked, you know, completely down the standings by any means. You know, a loss to NIP isn't the worst thing in the world, and you know, I am going to give them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, because I still think when Tarzan and Scout step up and play well, they're going to be fine. And perhaps if they had had a better bot lane draft here, the series could have gone a tad bit differently. If Hang had been able to outplay Zhuo, I think this could have gone a little bit differently, but I just feel like you set yourself up for failure with this draft. You set yourself up to not really have a lot of opportunity to win in the early game on the bot side, and that was just a problem going into a player like Photic. So LNG certainly with some issues, but certainly not issues that cannot be fixed. So, and then for NIP, I don't know, just a good series. Pout and Zhuo looking really, really good. Photic really being able to step up and take advantage of the opportunities that he was given. And then I think Invincible and Zhao and Bao have just been fine on the top side all year long. They certainly haven't been the problem for me. It's been mid and support that have been the major issues for me on the side of NIP. And both of those really showed up today. Hopefully, this is the beginning of a kind of turnaround, I would say, for them overall, because it was really frustrating to watch them through the first games, and it was really nice to watch them get their feet back here. Moving on now to our second game here of day, number 7. It was another interesting one, this time between two classic organizations in Royal Never Give Up and Team WE. And RNG does pick up a win here. Now, this honestly could be considered a bit of an upset with how both of these teams have been playing in recent memory, but honestly, RNG should theoretically be the better team, and so them being able to pick up a win here is just reassuring more than it is anything else. WE were able to steal game number 1. I should say this was more like a 3-0 for RNG rather than a 2-1, because they really had full control over game number 1. They just weren't able to close it out. Really good late game coming in from Shanks on the side of WE on that rise to really allow Hang to deal a lot of damage in that back half. Hope and Awandi got crushed all series long, which I will talk about when we get to the bot lane matchup, but Shanks did a good job keeping it alive and actually bringing back game 1 for WE, but games 2 and 3, they're not able to have the same magic. Game number 3 was incredibly close, and WE absolutely had a chance to win it. Unfortunately, there's only so much you can do when you have such a low damage comp. It's just not nearly enough damage. Ryze and Jhin are your two main carries going into something like Renekton, Maokai, Azir, Caitlyn on the back. You're never going to be able to get to them, and you're never really going to be able to blow them up, and so WE never really had an easy path to victory towards the back half of game number 3, but they certainly kept it interesting again off the back of Shanks playing incredibly well. This feels very much like Shanks being hard stuck, just like he was last year. But let's go ahead and talk about RNG. Player of the series, no question, gonna go to Gala in the bot lane. He just continues to look fantastic on an RNG team that doesn't really have a lot outside of him. I mean, him and Ming obviously are so good together, and Ming I think is almost underrated on Enchanters at this point. A lot of people talk about how he's only good at the Engagers. I do think he is a good Enchanter player. I don't think he's the best support in the world on Enchanters like he is on Engagers, but I certainly still think that he is like a top 5 support in the world on Enchanters. He's still very good, and Gala and him still play together incredibly well. Obviously, bringing Ming back is a huge boon, a huge plus for this RNG team, especially considering how Bunny was playing before Ming got back. It's definitely a positive that Gala now has somebody to play towards, and that they finally realize that they want to play towards bot lane, and that Gala should be strong side on the map instead of weak side, and trying to give Breathe all the resources. Wei was playing bot lane a lot in this series, and honestly, Wei was relatively good as well. Those 3, in my opinion, definitely the standout members. Wei, Gala, and Ming were definitely the 3 standout members that RNG really used to win this series, but Gala, a very easy choice for player of the series. He continues to look great, and in my opinion, is easily the best player on RNG so far in 2023. They did have some problems. RNG certainly ran into some issues. Angel was bad. Like, I don't really know what else to say. This mid lane position is a problem. Tong Yuan seems to be out. Angel seems to be in, at least for this series. They went with Angel going into Shanks, and honestly, Angel got gapped. In game number 3 in particular, he got gapped. Game number 1 was all Shanks. He looked incredibly good. Game number 2 was Angel. He looked good on the rise, but game number 3 was all Shanks on this rise again. He really obliterated Angel in that lane, and they won in spite of him, not because of him. Shanks was really the one keeping WE in that game, and so I don't know. I don't know what RNG needs to do in this mid lane spot, but basically whoever has been in there has been a problem for this roster, so whatever they are going to do, they need to do it quickly, because it is certainly not working right now. And then Breathe in the top lane was fine. Certainly didn't make any major mistakes. Was much more comfortable playing weak side than he was playing strong side like he had been earlier on in the year. But for WE, good and bad. Shanks was awesome. Shanks was legitimately awesome this series. I mean, this is the kind of performance you want to see out of Shanks. This is a team that has talent on it, and Shanks really stepped up and really played like a player that should have been winning the series. But unfortunately, the rest of his team was just a little bit too heavy to carry. Hope and Awandi were really bad in this series, and they've actually been pretty good over the course of the first couple of weeks, but they just were not on the same level as Gala and Ming in this series. Hope's going to get my dud of the game. Not only was he grossly out of position in games 1 and 2, and remember, they won game number 1. They absolutely won it in spite of this bot lane because they were atrociously not good in game number 1, but that Jhin in game number 3, if that is almost anything else that can do slightly more damage, WE probably walk out of the series with a 2-1 win, and that's got to be frustrating. Like, that's got to be incredibly frustrating to feel if you're on the side of WE, because you really should have been walking out of this with a win, but Hope just wasn't able to do it in the back half of game number 3. Awandi was constantly out of position, getting caught out on the Nami, on the Ashe. It didn't really matter. He was just not really playing all that well. Those two definitely needed to step up for WE to have a shot. Hang and Biu were fine. Hang had moments where he looked okay, but Wei was just the superior jungler this series, which is important and good to say because Wei has been quite bad over the beginning part of this year, so to see him actually have a good series against a relatively competent jungler, I think is a good thing to see, and then Biu was fine in the top lane, but this really was Shanks trying his best to win a series for WE. Outlook-wise, WE still looks pretty good. I mean, this could absolutely be a playoff team. I think the top 10 feel pretty locked for me right now. They are all incredibly strong, and so it's hard to find a way for WE to break in, but they definitely seem like the best team on the outside. Them and ThunderTalk are definitely fighting it out for that, but WE still looking pretty good even in the loss here. And then for RNG, you really needed this. I mean, if you had lost to WE here going 1-5, that would have been an absolute disaster for you to start your year. As it stands now at 2-4, you're still alive. Like, there's definitely a realistic possibility where you can just now go on a run, you get this team back into the form it was in, Gala gets on a really big hot streak, goes on this MVP caliber run, and, you're ending the season in 4th or 5th or something like that. That is totally reasonable for RNG from the position they're in right now, and that's truly what has to happen for this team to meet any sort of expectations that they had before the season started. They are really, kind of trying to come out of that free fall, and I, for one, hope they're able to do so because I really do like a lot of the players on this roster. That's going to bring us to our final series of the week here. We go through a lot of them, but we finally made the final one here, and it's a good one. It's another top team clash as we usually end the week with, as we saw Bilibili Gaming taking on Edward Gaming, and EDG picking up a really strong 2-0 win here. BLG, after beating Weibo, has just seemingly disintegrated. They have crumbled. They looked really good in that series outside of Yagao, and ever since then, things have just not worked out for pretty much any of these players. EDG, on the other hand, really are streaking at the right moment. They're 4-1 to start the year, and a lot of the players that I was concerned about going into the year have been really, really solid for them. Most notably, my player of the series here, Fofo, in the mid lane, who I really did like the way he played. Obviously, going into Yagao, who hasn't had the best of starts to the split, but Fofo really has had the best of starts to a split, and I actually think that he's been very fun to watch and incredibly consistent over the course of their first few games. I'm really giving him player of the series for the Sakali game in game number 2, where he really was able to pop off, he was able to take over, he was able to control his wave, he was able to control the rest of the jungle as well. Jun really had no pressure in game number 2 on this Nidalee, which we'll get to in a bit. Credit to JJ for that as well, but Fofo's incredible aggression and his ability to make plays on that Akali really is what enabled that. The other player I really want to shout out on the side of EDG here is going to be Ale in the top lane. He was fantastic. Ole's kind of been up and down, I would say, over the start of the year for EDG. I'd certainly say Fofo and Leave have been a little bit more of the carries for EDG so far this year, but Ale had a really good Fiora game in game 1. We know he is an incredibly talented top laner. We know he has, mechanics that can rival basically any top laner in the world. He just sometimes makes some incredibly awful decisions in game and really puts himself in bad predicaments and, makes himself play from behind, essentially. He didn't do that in this series. He just won on Fiora in game number 1. He looked solid on the Camille in game number 2. If Ale can keep playing like this, and Fofo's playing back to like 2021 Rare Atom Fofo, and Leave is, absolutely destroying people in lane, I believe he's like by far the highest in the league in CS per minute right now. This team is scary. Like, they're a legitimate threat to be top 3, top 4 in the league. Like, they are right there with basically anybody else. That loss to Invictus is definitely on the back of the mind with how good these solo laners are playing. Even the bot lane has really stepped up. Like I said, Leave and Mako in lane have been incredibly dominant, even on champions that aren't supposed to do super well in lane. Game number 1 here, Zeri Yumi into Lucian Nami. That should almost always be in favor of Lucian Nami. Luckily, Leave and Mako were just better in this series. Credit to them. Their laning is just unparalleled, and that's really what we knew Leave to be as coming into the league. He has really stepped it up and he's met my expectations. I talked about this going into the year in my preseason preview, that Leave was going to be the next big breakout AD carry of the LPL. It does seem like we're getting close to that. Fofo's been awesome. Ollie's been really good this series. EDG with a really nice win. As for BLG, another frustrating loss. You're now actually below 500. This is really not where you want to be. This was a really bad week 4 for you. June is going to get my dud of the series here. He was just really bad. I feel like at some point, you got to say, like, okay, Nidalee's just not meta. She's not good enough to be played in the meta right now, but I know June's really good at her, and so I understand that he wants to go back to her over and over again, but it's just not working. Like, ever since that Weibo series, he has not found an avenue to be able to play Nidalee at a high level. The Maokai in particular just really shuts down a lot of the early aggression plays that the Nidalee does want to end up making in a lot of these games, and June ended up paying the price for it. He had literally zero impact on this series. I think some people are going to want to give it to Yagao, who got outplayed by Fofo, which is absolutely true, but Yagao was constantly pushed in. It's not entirely his fault that his jungler just had no pressure in either of the games. I think you could give this to On, who wasn't particularly good in the bot lane matchup. Leave and Mako really were targeting and abusing him a lot in the early lane 2v2. Bin wasn't particularly good, just got outplayed by Alle. Basically, everybody on BLG struggled in this series, and it's a little concerning. I would be lying if I said I wasn't concerned for BLG. I do think that this team definitely still has the upside to be a top 3, top 4 team in the LPL, a world caliber team, but I have to be honest, right now they're just not playing like it. Even after the giant win over Weibo Gaming, it feels like that's almost set them back more than it has pushed them forward. So BLG still has a lot to prove to me, and a lot of that is going to have to come later in the year, because after week 4, I'm really not sold on this team being a top team in the league. And then for EDG, maybe I am sold. They're right up there with a lot of the other teams. I think that, I would say like 2 or 3 to like 6 feels very close right now. There are a lot of really good teams in the LPL, and it's very hard to kind of distinguish them between each other. I feel like it's all just who you personally believe in more. I have a lot of faith in this EDG team. I love Leave as a player. I truly do believe he can be the focal point of like a championship winning team eventually in his LPL career. He does make some positioning mistakes. He does step up and have some very, very poor positioning mistakes, but you can work on that. You can get that out of his system, and honestly, his ability to lane and his ability to generate leads is second to none, basically, in the LPL already. If he can just kind of clean up a lot of the mistakes, if Fofo can continue to be consistent, if Alle can just have good games instead of having the up and down seasons that he's had in years past, I mean, EDG very well could be a contender to be like a top 2, 3 team in the LPL. All right, that is going to do it for my LPL Week 4 overview and analysis of all 7 days of games. There's a lot to cover in these LPL videos, and I really appreciate you guys sticking around to the end. Up on the screen right now, you're going to see the updated Week 4 LPL standings. Of course, any ties will just be broken alphabetically. In the first column to the right, you're going to see my updated power rankings. In the second, you're going to be seeing how those have changed from last week to this week. So let's go over the risers and the fallers. The biggest risers this week, Weibo Gaming jumping back up from number 4 to number 2. They really have proved that they are right in that top 2 with JDG. I think any given day they can beat JDG. They proved that when they beat them this week, but it's just hard for me to consider a team as volatile as Weibo the number 1 team in the LPL. I think they absolutely can be, but JDG for now with that super team designation will keep that. A 2-1 week wasn't bad at all for JDG. They just weren't able to get it done in that final game 3. I think there is a real chance things go differently next time they play. The other big riser, EDG, jumping up from number 6 to number 4. They have jumped into the top 4, which of course is a huge boon. That's Worlds at the end of the year. Of course, top 2 is MSI, but EDG having a really good week. I think proving a lot of the concerns I had about them just not valid. Leave is there. Fofo is there. Alle is there. They're all playing really well right now, and I hope that they can keep it up. Invictus Gaming jumps up to number 7. RNG jumps up to number 8. Those round out our risers. Our fallers, big faller of the week, no surprise, gonna be Bilibili Gaming, falling from number 3 to number 6. Still a pretty good ranking. I think top 6 is all incredibly scary. Even top 7, all incredibly scary, but BLG just feels right on the outside of that cusp right now. They have too many things they need to work on. Yagao certainly doesn't feel like he meshes with the rest of the team, and June and Yagao in particular don't seem to have any sort of mid-jungle chemistry. If they can get on the same page, I do think BLG can still be a top team, but right now, it just doesn't feel like it's in the cards at the moment. Other followers, OMG dropping to number 9. I actually don't think they had that bad of a week losing to LNG, but I actually feel more comfortable about RNG and IG than I do about OMG, both of whom jumped up a couple of spots. And then Top Esports dropping down to number 3 just because I needed to move Weibo up. Top actually had a really good week, but Weibo does feel like the better team, at least to me right now. But that's going to move us into our player of the week and our dud of the week. My player of the week here in week 4 of the LPL is going to go to on Invictus Gaming. He had a fantastic week. On and Wink continue to be maybe the best bot lane in the region. I mean, obviously Ruler and Missing would like a word with that, but certainly right up there with basically anybody. If they can keep that going, Invictus is going to be much higher than number 7 in my power rankings right now. I just want to see them play against some of the top teams in the region, but On right now, in particular, had a phenomenal week, really carrying Invictus across the finish line. And then my dud of the week, unfortunately, is going to go to Ching on the side of Ultra Prime. Not a very good week for Ultra Prime in general, but Ching in particular kind of proves that he's just not at this level in the mid lane right now. I'm not exactly sure if you should be looking for a replacement because it could just be one bad week, but he hasn't been particularly good to start the year at all, and honestly, I was a little bit lower on him in the LDL than a lot of other analysts. Anyways, I definitely think he's been a little bit of a problem for a team that is, quite frankly, full of problems. So Ching is going to get my dud of the week, and On is going to get my player of the week, but that is going to do it. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please let me know down in the comments section below. What do you guys think of my power rankings? Who is too high? Who is too low? Is Invictus too low? Is BLG too high? Let me know how you guys feel about all that down in the comment section below. Of course, if you enjoyed the video, hit the like button. These take a lot of time and effort to make, you know, graphics-wise and everything. It really would mean a lot if you hit that. And of course, if you are new, hit that subscribe button. Not only do we do weekly LPL recaps, we do the same for the LCS, the LEC, the LCK, and the NACL. So if you're interested in the full range of LoL Esports coverage on a weekly basis, hit that subscribe button. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.